I am Maya, 35 years old, and 2 years ago, my parents stole my entire life savings to fund my brother's failing business because they believed a black man needs capital to lead the family legacy. They told me to be a good sister and accept my place in the background. I just packed my bags and walked away in silence. What they did not know was that while they were parading his fake success, I was quietly building a cybersecurity empire worth millions. When they tried to force me to surrender my home to save his collapsing company, I handed them an eviction notice instead. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members who demanded your loyalty but never respected your worth. The scent of candied yams and roasted turkey hung heavy in the dining room. It was Sunday afternoon at my parents' house in Atlanta. The post-church dinner was a weekly ritual that usually involved my mother Yvonne complaining about the pastor's sermon, while my father Calvin held court at the head of the long mahogany table. I had maintained minimal contact with them for the past 2 years, choosing to show up only for major holidays and the occasional Sunday dinner just to keep up appearances. I sat quietly at the end of the table cutting into a piece of cornbread when the familiar, uncomfortable shift in the room's energy occurred. My mother stood up from her chair, smoothed down her floral Sunday dress, and walked over to me. She did not offer me more collard greens or ask about my week. Instead, she pulled a thick stapled stack of legal papers from her purse and slid it directly over my plate. The heavy document landed right on top of my napkin. I looked down and read the bold black letters printed across the top page. It was a loan guarantor agreement. "I need you to sign this, Maya," my father said. He did not ask. He commanded. His voice carried the same booming authority he used when addressing the church deacons. "Your brother is going through a temporary rough patch with his marketing agency. The bank is being unreasonable about extending his credit line. We need you to leverage the equity in your little condo to secure the capital he needs to get through the quarter." I stared at the document and then shifted my gaze to my older brother, Jamal. He sat across from me, twirling his fork and his macaroni and cheese, looking completely unbothered. He wore a designer suit that cost more than my first car. Next to him sat his white wife, Chloe, who was busy inspecting her manicured nails, pretending not to listen to a conversation she had clearly helped orchestrate. "You want me to put my home on the line to cover Jamal's debts?" I asked, my voice perfectly calm. I did not yell. I did not react with the explosive anger they were expecting and hoping to use against me. I simply pushed the stack of papers back across the table away from my food. "The answer is absolutely not," my mother gasped, pressing a hand to her chest as if I had just committed a mortal sin. "Maya Elise, how can you be so selfish? Your own flesh and blood is asking for your help. We are family and family sacrifices for each other." I leaned back in my chair and looked directly into my father's eyes. "Sacrifice." I repeated the word slowly, letting it hang in the quiet dining room. "Let us talk about sacrifice, Calvin. Let us talk about what happened exactly 2 years ago when I was 33. Let us talk about how I spent 5 grueling years building my career, saving every single penny I earned from long, grueling nights, writing code and securing low-level cybersecurity contracts, just so I could afford to pay for my Stanford Executive MBA program in cash." My father shifted uncomfortably in his leather chair, but I did not let him interrupt. I reminded him of how he had convinced me to park those funds in the newly established Family Trust, LLC. He had used his business degree to persuade me, claiming the corporate structure would provide massive tax benefits for my tuition payments. I had trusted him because he was my father. I had trusted the family. And then 1 week before I was supposed to book my flight to California to start the program, I logged into the bank portal to transfer my tuition payment. The balance was zero. I watched Jamal swallow hard as I recounted the story. I reminded them of how I had driven straight to this very house, terrified that we had been hacked or defrauded. I remembered running into the living room shaking and asking where my $150,000 had gone. And I reminded them of exactly what my father had said to me that day. You told me you transferred my entire life savings to Jamal, I said, keeping my voice razor sharp. You looked me in the eye and told me that Jamal had a massive opportunity to expand his marketing agency and needed immediate liquid capital. You told me that a black man needs capital to lead the family legacy and that a woman does not need an expensive business degree to find a husband. You stole my future to fund his ego. That was not stealing, my father boomed, slamming his fist on the table, causing the crystal glasses to rattle. That was a strategic reallocation of family resources. I am the patriarch of this family, and I made a decision that was best for our collective future. Jamal is building generational wealth. He is establishing a name for us in the corporate world. You were just going to waste that money on a vanity degree. You should have been proud to support your brother's vision. Proud, I asked, a bitter smile forming on my lips. Proud of what exactly? Proud of watching him buy a brand new Porsche 2 weeks after you drained my account. Proud of watching him take luxury vacations to Dubai while I had to cancel my enrollment at Stanford and take on freelance IT jobs just to pay my rent. You did not build generational wealth, Calvin. You funded a lifestyle illusion. And when I confronted Jamal about it 2 years ago, he laughed in my face and told me to stop acting like a victim. So I did. I stopped acting like a victim. I packed my bags and walked away from this toxic dynamic. I never asked you for a single dime. I never brought it up again. I simply went to work. My mother stepped forward, her face flushed with defensive anger. We gave you life, Maya. We put a roof over your head and food in your stomach for 18 years. You owe this family. You owe your brother. His business is just hitting a minor speed bump. If you do not sign these papers, the bank will seize his office building. He will lose everything. He is going to lose it anyway, I said softly, because a business built on stolen money and entitlement is just a house of cards waiting for the wind to blow. I will not let you take my home to prop up his failures. Jamal finally looked up from his plate, his face twisted into an ugly sneer. You are so arrogant, Maya. You sit in your little condo tapping on your computer thinking you know everything about the real world. You do not understand how high-level corporate marketing works. Sometimes you have to project success to attract success. I needed that capital to secure high-end clients. You are just bitter because you do not understand business. I did not raise my voice, but the silence that followed my next words was deafening. I understand business perfectly, Jamal, I said. I understand that your revenue has been negative for 4 consecutive quarters. I understand that you have lost 3 of your major accounts because you missed critical deadlines while you were vacationing in Cabo. I understand that you have been using new investor money to pay off old debts. Jamal's face drained of color. How do you know that? He stammered. I ignored his question and turned back to my father. You ask me to sacrifice my home for a man who has never worked an honest day in his life. You ask me to save a legacy that is nothing but a facade. You stole my savings and expected me to stay quiet and obedient. You underestimated me. You thought because I was quiet, because I was a woman, because I focused on my work, instead of seeking the spotlight, that I was weak. You thought I would just absorb the loss and keep showing up to Sunday dinner pretending we were a happy family. You were wrong. I am not signing your papers, Calvin. I am not saving your golden child. I am walking out that door and you will never see another cent from me. The quiet that followed my words was thick enough to choke on. Nobody moved and nobody breathed. Then the sharp clink of crystal against fine china broke the tension. Chloe set her mimosa glass down on the table. She dabbed the corners of her mouth with a linen napkin, acting as though we were having a polite debate over the country club menu rather than dissecting the financial ruin of my life. Maya, I really think you need to lower your voice and look at the bigger picture here, Chloe said. Her tone carried that specific patronizing softness she always used when she wanted to play the mediator. Jamal is trying to build something permanent. He is trying to create generational wealth for this family. You know how important that is for the Black community. It is about legacy. You acting like this over some graduate school money from 2 years ago is honestly just holding everyone back. I slowly turned my head to look at my sister-in-law. She sat there in her pastel sundress, casually sipping her drink and explaining my own culture and family dynamics to me. She was telling me that my stolen savings were just a mandatory family tax, a necessary sacrifice for the greater good of a legacy she had married into just 3 years prior. She wielded her progressive therapy speak like a weapon, twisting my completely valid anger into a character flaw. And let us be completely honest with each other, Chloe continued, oblivious to the danger she was walking into. You are single, Maya. You do not have children. You do not have a husband to support. A single woman does not need an executive MBA from Stanford to find fulfillment. You have a nice little job. But Jamal is the head of his household. He is the future of the Wilson name. Your money served a higher purpose. You should be grateful that you could contribute to your brother's vision instead of just hoarding it for a degree you do not even need. My mother nodded enthusiastically at this. She actually reached over and patted Chloe's hand, murmuring her agreement. I looked at the two of them, united in their belief that my only value on this earth was to be a stepping stone for Jamal. They truly believed that my lack of a wedding ring completely negated my right to financial autonomy. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I placed my hands flat on the mahogany table and leaned forward just enough to make Chloe shift uncomfortably in her seat. Generational wealth. I repeated, testing the phrase on my tongue. That is a fascinating concept, Chloe. I am so glad you brought it up, because when I walked through the front door this afternoon, I noticed a few interesting additions to the entryway. Sitting right next to the coat rack is a brand new limited edition Hermes Birkin bag, the matte crocodile one, and right beside it is a matching set of Louis Vuitton weekend luggage. Chloe's face tightened. Her hand froze halfway to her mimosa glass. The smug satisfaction drained from her features, replaced by a sudden rigid panic. Now I am just a single woman with a nice little job, I said, keeping my voice dangerously smooth. But I do know how to read a market report. That specific handbag retails for roughly $85,000 on the secondary market. The luggage set is another $15,000. That is an even $100,000 in luxury leather goods sitting in my parents' hallway. So please, Chloe, explain the math to me. If my brother's business is tanking so badly that my father is demanding I sign over the equity of my home to save him from bankruptcy, how exactly are you funding your shopping sprees? Jamal slammed his hand flat against the table. Do not speak to my wife like that. You do not know anything about our finances. I know that you are wearing a $50,000 Audemars Piguet watch on your left wrist. I fired back, never breaking eye contact with Chloe. I know that your wife is wearing a Cartier tennis bracelet that costs more than my annual property taxes. You are sitting here crying poverty, demanding I give up the only asset I own, while you are literally dripping in the money you stole from me. That is enough, Calvin roared. My father stood up so violently his heavy wooden chair scraped backward against the hardwood floor. He brought his closed fist down on the table with a crash that made the silverware jump and the water glasses spill onto the lace tablecloth. The veins in his neck pushed against his tight white collar. His face was a mask of absolute patriarchal rage. You will respect the hierarchy of this house, Calvin bellowed, his voice echoing off the high ceiling. I am the head of this family. I make the financial decisions and I decide what is best for the Wilson name. Jamal is your older brother. He is a married man with responsibilities that you could not possibly understand. You will not sit at my table and disrespect him. You will not interrogate his wife about how she chooses to present herself in society. You will do your duty as a daughter. I looked up at the man who had raised me. I saw the absolute conviction in his eyes. He genuinely believed he owned me. He believed my money, my labor, my property, and my future all belonged to him, to distribute to his favored child however he saw fit. He saw my independence as an insult to his authority, and my financial success as a threat to Jamal's fragile ego. My duty, I said the word, leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. My duty was to be the obedient bank account. My duty was to sacrifice my education so Jamal could play CEO. You told me 2 years ago that my ambitions were a cute hobby. You told me to get over the fact that you drained my trust fund. And you should have, Yvonne chimed in, her voice shrill with indignation. You are holding on to poison, Maya. You are letting resentment destroy your heart. Your brother is on the verge of losing his business, and you are bringing up old grievances just to be spiteful. A good Christian woman would forgive and forget. I am bringing up facts, Yvonne, I said, refusing to call her mom. I am pointing out the hypocrisy of a family that claims to value legacy, but builds it on theft. You want to talk about the bigger picture, Chloe? The bigger picture is that Jamal is a fraud. He has always been a fraud. He cannot run a business to save his life, and you are all bleeding yourselves dry trying to maintain the illusion that he is some kind of corporate prodigy. I said, shut your mouth! Calvin yelled, pointing a thick, trembling finger at my face. You will sign those guarantor papers today, Maya. You will secure that loan for your brother. I am not asking you, I am telling you. If you refuse, you are turning your back on your own blood. You will have no family. You will have no one. I let the echo of my father's ultimatum ring through the dining room. You will have no family. You will have no one. For 35 years, those words would have paralyzed me. They would have sent me scrambling for a pen to sign away my condo, my security, and my peace of mind just to stay in their good graces. But sitting there looking at Calvin's flushed face and Jamal's expectant smirk, I felt nothing but a profound, absolute calm. I reached into my leather tote sitting by my feet. It was not an Hermes Birkin, but it was paid for with clean money. The room held its breath. Yvonne relaxed her shoulders, clearly thinking I was reaching for the pen she had set out earlier. Chloe took another self-satisfied sip of her mimosa, acting as though the natural order of the universe had just been restored. I pulled out my phone and unlocked the screen. I did not look at the guarantor document. I looked directly at the man who had just threatened to erase me from his bloodline. Having no family is not a threat. Calvin, I said, my voice dropping to a low, steady pitch that commanded the room far better than his shouting ever could. It is a promise, and it is one I am entirely comfortable with. Because the family you are talking about operates like a cartel, where I am expected to pay protection money just to sit at this table. I am officially opting out. I tapped the screen of my phone and slid it across the polished mahogany wood. It came to a stop right in front of Jamal, bumping gently against his water glass. What is this? Jamal asked, narrowing his eyes. He did not touch the phone. He looked at it like it was a live grenade. That is a certified digital deed, I explained, leaning back and crossing my legs, to a commercial property located at 800 Peachtree Street. A premium Class A office space right in the heart of Midtown Atlanta. 4 floors, floor-to-ceiling windows, private parking garage. Calvin frowned heavily, his thick eyebrows pulling together. What does a commercial building have to do with you signing this loan document, Maya? Stop playing games and pick up the pen. I am not playing games, Calvin, I said. I am doing exactly what Chloe suggested. I am looking at the bigger picture. I am looking at generational wealth. You see, I finalized the purchase of that building last Tuesday. I paid in cash through a corporate holding company so the previous owner would not immediately broadcast the sale. The silence that fell over the room was absolute, the kind of heavy, suffocating quiet that happens right before a storm breaks. Jamal finally picked up the phone. His eyes scanned the bright screen, reading the legal text, the property boundaries, and the final seal of the county clerk. Wait, Jamal said, his voice suddenly sounding very thin and very young. Wait a minute. This is my building. This is the address of my agency. I smiled, a slow, calculated smile that made Chloe put her drink down completely. Correction, Jamal, I said. It is my building. You just work there. Or rather, you have been pretending to work there while dodging calls from the property management company. Yvonne gasped, gripping the edge of the table. Maya Elise, what have you done? How on earth did you get the money to buy a commercial high-rise? I told you, I replied, never breaking my gaze from Jamal. I stopped acting like a victim and I went to work. While you were throwing galas to celebrate Jamal's fake marketing contracts, I was securing global cybersecurity infrastructure for major financial institutions. While Chloe was buying crocodile handbags, I was buying commercial real estate. I own the ground your golden boy walks on. Calvin stood perfectly still. The red flush of anger had drained from his face, leaving him looking pale and suddenly very old. "You bought the building your brother leases?" he asked, his voice lacking its previous thunder. "I bought the building your son currently occupies," I corrected. "And I did it because it was a solid investment in a prime location. But mostly I did it because I knew the previous landlord was preparing to send the account to collections." I reached into my tote bag one last time. I pulled out a thick manila envelope sealed with a red string. I did not slide this one across the table. I stood up, picking up my purse. I walked around the large dining table, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. I stopped right behind Jamal's chair. He was gripping my phone so tightly his knuckles were white, his eyes darting frantically across the digital deed as if looking for a loophole that did not exist. I dropped the manila envelope directly onto the center of his plate, right on top of his untouched food. "What is this?" Chloe asked, her voice pitching upward in panic. "Jamal, what is she doing?" "I will tell you exactly what I am doing, Chloe," I said, looking down at her. "I am running my business. And as the new owner of 800 Peachtree Street, I conducted a thorough audit of the tenant ledgers. Jamal, you are exactly 90 days behind on your lease payments. You owe $45,000 in back rent. You have ignored 3 consecutive warnings from the previous management firm. You assumed because the building was changing hands that you could slip through the cracks and buy yourself another month to scheme your way out of debt." Jamal stared at the envelope on his plate. He did not speak. He could not speak. The facade of the successful black entrepreneur, the pride of the Wilson family, was crumbling in real time, right in front of the parents who had worshipped him. "I do not offer grace periods, Jamal," I said, the finality in my voice echoing in the silent room. "I do not care about your high-end clients or your desperate need to project a lifestyle you cannot afford. That envelope contains a formal 3-day pay or quit notice. You have exactly 72 hours to clear the $45,000 balance. If the funds are not in my holding company's account by Wednesday morning, the sheriff will be at your glass office to escort you off my property." "Maya, please." Yvonne cried out, tears welling in her eyes. She reached out to grab my arm, but I stepped back smoothly, avoiding her touch. "You cannot evict your own brother. It will ruin him. The church will find out. The whole community will know." "Then maybe the community should start a prayer circle for his finances," I said coldly. I looked at Calvin, who was staring at the table, completely speechless. His entire worldview fractured by the reality that the daughter he discarded was the one holding all the power. I looked at Chloe, who was staring at Jamal with a mixture of horror and disgust, realizing her luxury ride was coming to an abrupt and public halt. I retrieved my phone from Jamal's frozen hand, slipping it back into my bag. "I am not signing your guarantor document, Calvin," I said, turning toward the front hallway. "And I am not staying for dessert. You have 72 hours, Jamal. I highly suggest you sell the Porsche." I walked out of the dining room, leaving the loan papers sitting next to the sweet potato pie. I did not look back as I reached the front door. I pulled it open, letting the warm Atlanta air hit my face. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind me, sealing them inside with the wreckage of their own making. I walked down the driveway toward my car, my head held high, the keys to my new empire resting comfortably in my hand. The memory of that betrayal still burned in my chest like a brand. 2 years ago exactly, I stood at the marble counter of the First National Bank branch in downtown Atlanta. I was 33 years old. In my left hand, I held the thick, cream-colored envelope containing my official acceptance letter to the Stanford Executive MBA program. In my right hand, I held my ID, waiting for the teller to print the cashier's check that would secure my seat in the upcoming cohort. I had spent 5 years sacrificing every luxury, every vacation, every weekend to build that fund. $150,000. Clean money earned from hundreds of freelance cybersecurity audits and grueling hours writing custom firewall code for small businesses who could barely afford to pay me. The teller, a young woman with nervous eyes, typed on her keyboard. She stopped. She frowned and typed again. She looked at my ID, then looked at her screen. "Miss Wilson," she said, her voice dropping to an uncomfortable whisper, "I cannot process this cashier's check." I smiled politely, assuming it was a simple security hold. I told her it was a large withdrawal, and the bank probably just needed verbal authorization. No, she said, sliding my ID back across the marble. The account is empty. The balance is zero. The air in the bank suddenly felt too thick to breathe. I asked her to check again. I gave her the exact routing number for the Family Trust LLC. I explained that my father had set it up specifically to hold my educational funds for tax purposes. The teller turned her monitor slightly so I could see the harsh glowing numbers. $0.00. She pointed to a line item from 3 days prior. A wire transfer had cleared the account, taking every single dime. The authorized signer on the transfer was Calvin Wilson. The recipient account belonged to Jamal Wilson Marketing Solutions. I did not scream. I did not cry. The shock paralyzed my vocal cords, but it set my mind racing at a terrifying speed. My father had not set up a trust to protect my money. He had set up a legal trap. He had used his financial authority to bypass my individual ownership, funneling the cash I bled for directly into the pockets of his favorite child. I walked out of the bank into the blazing Georgia heat. The Stanford letter in my hand felt like a mocking joke. I threw it onto the passenger seat of my car and gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The drive to the commercial district was a blur of traffic lights and blinding rage. My brother had recently leased a new office space, boasting about his rapidly expanding agency at every Sunday dinner. Now I knew exactly who was funding his expansion. Me. I pulled up to a sleek glass and steel building in Buckhead. It was the kind of real estate that demanded massive capital just to cover the security deposit. I shoved my car into park right in the fire lane, not caring if it got towed. The anger propelling me forward was a physical force. I walked through the revolving doors and scanned the directory. Jamal Wilson Marketing Solutions occupied the entire top floor. I rode the elevator up the silence of the steel box, amplifying the pounding of my heart. When the doors pinged open, I stepped into a reception area that looked like a movie set. Imported Italian marble floors stretched across the lobby. A custom neon sign flashed Jamal's agency logo against a living moss wall. A receptionist wearing a headset sat behind a sleek, curved desk. She smiled a practiced corporate smile and asked if I had an appointment. I did not stop walking. I bypassed her desk entirely, ignoring her sudden protests. I marched down a hallway lined with private suites, pushing past junior executives who stared at me in shock. I knew exactly which office was his. It was the one at the very end of the hall, featuring double glass doors and a panoramic view of the city skyline. I shoved the glass doors open with enough force that they slammed against the doorstops. Jamal was sitting behind a massive slab of imported walnut that served as his desk. He was leaning back in a high-backed leather ergonomic chair, tossing a miniature basketball into a hoop attached to his door. He wore a crisp, tailored suit jacket with no tie, the picture of casual corporate arrogance. He did not jump when I burst in. He simply caught the little basketball and raised an eyebrow. "Maya," he said, leaning forward and resting his elbows on the walnut surface. "You cannot just barge past my receptionist. We are running a professional operation here." I walked right up to the desk. I planted my hands on the wood, mirroring his posture, but carrying none of his manufactured calm. "Where is my money, Jamal?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "Where is the $150,000 Dad wired you on Tuesday?" Jamal let out a short, dismissive laugh. He tossed the basketball onto the desk and leaned back again, lacing his fingers together behind his head. He looked at me not with guilt, but with profound irritation, as if I were a child interrupting important business. "Dad reallocated the family capital," he said casually, as if we were discussing a minor stock trade. "My agency just landed a massive opportunity to pitch a national beverage brand. I needed liquid assets immediately to scale up the team and secure this office space. You know how it is in this industry, Maya. You have to spend money to make money." I stared at him, letting his ridiculous justification hang in the air. "That was not family capital," I said, enunciating every single syllable. "That was my money. I earned it. I saved it. I placed it in that account to pay for my degree. You and Calvin stole it to pay for this fake Silicon Valley aesthetic." Jamal rolled his eyes and sighed heavily. He sat forward and pointed a finger at me. "Stop acting like a victim, Maya. It is exhausting. You are acting like Dad took your last dollar. You have a job. You can just save up again. I am trying to build an empire here. I am trying to elevate the Wilson name to the next tier. A black man needs capital to lead the family legacy. Dad saw the vision, and he made the executive call to back the winning horse. The winning horse, I repeated. You have bankrupted 3 separate startups before you turned 30. You defaulted on 2 business loans that Dad had to quietly pay off. You are not a winning horse, Jamal. You are a liability who knows how to buy nice suits. His face darkened, the arrogant smirk vanishing. You need to watch your tone, he snapped. I am the CEO of this firm, and I will not have my little sister coming into my place of business disrespecting me. You do not even need an executive MBA. What are you going to do with it? You sit behind a computer all day typing code. You are not a leader, Maya. You are support staff. I looked around the opulent office, taking in the imported furniture, the modern art on the walls, the espresso machine humming in the corner. Every single item in this room had been purchased with my sweat. I had denied myself everything, so my brother could play pretend. I am going to call the police, I said evenly. I am going to report a fraudulent transfer of funds. I will press charges against you for receiving stolen property, and I will press charges against Calvin for wire fraud. Jamal laughed again, this time a loud booming sound. You are bluffing, he said. You would never put Dad in a courtroom. You would never risk embarrassing the family in front of the congregation. And even if you tried, it is a joint family trust account. Dad was the primary signer. Legally, he can move those funds wherever he wants. You have no legal standing, Maya. You are just throwing a tantrum because you did not get your way. He stood up and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the traffic below. He gestured toward the street. Come here, he commanded. Come look at this. I did not move. I said, come look at this, Maya. He turned his head and gave me a sharp, impatient glare. I walked over to the window, standing a few feet away from him. He pointed down to the private VIP parking lot directly in front of the building. Sitting in the premier spot, gleaming under the midday sun, was a brand new midnight black Porsche 911. I needed a vehicle that communicates success to high net worth clients, Jamal said, his voice swelling with pride. When I pull up to a meeting in that car, they know I mean business. They know the Wilson Agency is a major player. I looked down at the luxury sports car and then back up to my brother's face. You bought a Porsche? I stated, the reality of his absolute delusion finally sinking in. You drained my tuition fund, the money I bled for, to buy a sports car and rent an office you do not need. I made an investment in our future, he corrected sharply. And when this agency hits $100 million in revenue, you will be begging me for a job. So I suggest you adjust your attitude right now. I stared at him, letting the sheer magnitude of his delusion wash over me. Adjust my attitude. The words hung in the sterile, air-conditioned climate of his corner office. You are standing in a leased suite, looking down at a depreciating asset, and you have the nerve to call it an investment. You are not building an empire, Jamal. You are playing dress-up with my money. Stop acting like a victim, Maya, Jamal snapped, turning away from the window to face me. He leaned against the glass, crossing his arms over his tailored chest. It is incredibly unattractive. You are 33 years old and you are crying over school money like a teenager whose allowance got cut. Do you have any idea the kind of pressure I am under? Do you know what it takes to secure a seat at the table in this city? I cannot walk into boardrooms looking like a charity case. I need to project absolute, unshakable success. You sitting in your apartment writing lines of code does not require $150,000 in liquid capital. I needed it. The family needed it. Before I could tear into his ridiculous justification, the heavy glass doors to the office swung open. The sharp sound of my mother's laughter filtered into the room, followed immediately by the booming baritone of my father, the patriarch's arrival. Calvin and Yvonne strolled into the suite carrying a chilled bottle of Dom Perignon and a box of expensive cigars. They were dressed for a celebration. My father wore a sharp navy blazer, and my mother was draped in silk. They stopped dead in their tracks when they saw me standing in the center of the room. The joyous smiles on their faces instantly hardened into masks of deep irritation. Maya. My mother said, her voice dropping an octave. What are you doing here? You are supposed to be at work. I am supposed to be paying my tuition, Yvonne, I said, turning my back on Jamal to face the architect of this entire nightmare. I'm supposed to be packing my bags for California, but I cannot do that because my bank account is empty. I stepped directly into my father's personal space, forcing him to look me in the eye. I expected to see at least a flicker of guilt, a momentary flash of shame for looking his daughter in the face after robbing her blind. I saw absolutely nothing. His eyes were cold, calculating, and completely devoid of remorse. How could you do it, Calvin? I asked, my voice shaking with a rage I could barely contain. You were the trustee. I trusted you to hold that money. I bled for 5 years to build that fund, and you wired it to him without even having the decency to look me in the face and ask. The provider's speech. Calvin did not flinch. He handed the champagne bottle to my mother and unbuttoned his blazer, projecting the absolute authority he wielded like a weapon. He looked down at me, his expression mirroring Jamal's earlier annoyance. You need to lower your voice and check your tone, Maya, he commanded. You are standing in your brother's place of business. You will conduct yourself with decorum. Decorum? I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. You stole my life savings and you want to talk about decorum? I did not steal anything, my father stated, his voice echoing with absolute patriarchal certainty. I made a strategic executive decision for the betterment of the Wilson name. That trust was established under my authority, and as the head of this family, it is my fundamental responsibility to allocate our resources where they will generate the greatest return. He stepped past me, walking over to Jamal and clapping a heavy hand on his son's shoulder. Jamal is a man. Calvin continued, looking at me as if I were a slow child, failing to grasp a basic concept. He is the future patriarch. He is building a legacy that will carry our name for generations. He needs capital to establish his dominance in the corporate world. A man must be a provider, Maya. He must conquer. That requires significant financial backing. And what about my future? I demanded. What about the degree I earned admission to? What about the company I want to build? Calvin sighed, a deep, theatrical exhalation of pure condescension. Maya, your little cybersecurity projects are a cute hobby. They keep you busy. But let us live in reality for a moment. You are a single woman. You do not have a family to support. You do not have a household to lead. Sending you to an elite business program across the country was always a frivolous waste of family funds. A woman does not need an executive MBA to secure a husband or maintain a comfortable life. You have a perfectly adequate job right now. You should be proud that your savings were able to support your brother's ascension. That is what family does. We sacrifice for the greater good. I stood there entirely paralyzed by the sheer breathtaking audacity of his words. He was completely serious. In his mind, my ambition was a cute hobby to keep me occupied until a man came along to claim me. My 5 years of grueling technical labor existed solely to be harvested and handed over to a son who had never worked an honest day in his life, the sister-in-law's insult. Before I could find the words to respond to that level of disrespect, the office doors opened a second time. The sharp, rhythmic clicking of designer heels announced her arrival before she even stepped fully into the room. Chloe glided into the suite, a vision of perfectly manufactured wealth. She was wearing a pristine white linen suit and oversized sunglasses, holding a tray of iced matcha lattes in one hand. Her other arm was weighed down by 4 massive shopping bags from Neiman Marcus and Saks Fifth Avenue. She stopped in the doorway, taking in the tense posture of my father, the smug stance of my brother, and my rigid, shaking frame. "Oh, goodness," Chloe said, pulling off her sunglasses with a dramatic sigh. I could hear the yelling all the way down the hall. "Maya, what are you doing here, bringing all this negative energy into Jamal's new sanctuary? We are supposed to be celebrating today." I looked at the designer bags dangling from her wrist. I looked at the fresh blowout and the immaculate manicure. I realized with sickening clarity that my tuition money was not just funding an office and a Porsche, it was funding Chloe's entire aesthetic. She is just leaving, Chloe, Jamal said, waving a dismissive hand in my direction. She is throwing a tantrum about the trust fund transfer. She cannot handle the fact that Dad invested in a real business instead of her school project. Chloe's perfectly sculpted face melted into an expression of profound patronizing pity. She set the tray of drinks down on the receptionist's overflow desk and walked over to me. She looked at me the way one might look at a stray dog begging for scraps outside a fine dining restaurant. Maya, honey, you really need to let this go, Chloe said, her voice dripping with toxic sweetness. You are letting jealousy make you bitter. Jamal is providing for us. He is building something incredible. You cannot expect the family to just halt our progress so you can go play student in California. It is just not realistic. I stared at her completely speechless. Chloe sighed again, reaching into her quilted Prada handbag. She snapped open her designer wallet and pulled out a crisp new $100 bill. She stepped forward and held the money out to me, her manicured fingers pressing the paper toward my chest. Here, Chloe said, offering me the ultimate insult. I know things might be a little tight for you right now since you were banking on that money. Go buy yourself a nice lunch somewhere downtown, get a glass of wine, relax, and please just get over it. We are a family. We do not need this kind of toxicity ruining our day. I looked down at the crisp paper pinched between her manicured fingers. Benjamin Franklin stared back at me, $100 offered as a pathetic consolation prize for a stolen $150,000. The sheer absurdity of the gesture extinguished whatever remaining warmth I held for these people. I did not swat the money away. I did not scream or fall to pieces the way they expected me to. I took the bill from her fingertips with deliberate slowness. Chloe smiled, a self-satisfied curve of her lips, genuinely believing she had successfully pacified the unruly sister with a bit of pocket change. I held the bill up between my hands, ripped it cleanly in half, and let the two pieces flutter onto the imported Italian rug. Chloe let out a sharp gasp, stepping back as if I had physically struck her. My mother pressed her hand to her pearls, her mouth falling open in performative shock. Calvin's face darkened with fresh rage, his chest puffing out to deliver another booming lecture about respect and hierarchy. But I did not give him the chance to speak. I reached into the front pocket of my tote bag. My fingers brushed past my wallet and my laptop charger, settling on the heavy brass keychain I had carried since I was 16 years old. It held my car key, my apartment fob, and the 2 gold keys to the house on Maple Drive, the house I grew up in. The house where I was taught that my only value was in my quiet obedience. I detached the 2 gold keys from the ring. The metallic clink of the brass sliding against the key ring was the only sound in the dead silence of the executive suite. I walked past Chloe, ignoring her completely. I stepped up to Jamal's massive walnut desk right next to the miniature basketball hoop he used to distract himself from his failing margins. I dropped the keys onto the polished wood. They landed with a heavy final thud that seemed to echo off the floor-to-ceiling windows. "What is this?" Jamal asked, his voice losing its corporate arrogance and slipping back into the uncertain tone of a boy who knew he was caught. "Those are my keys to Calvin and Yvonne's house," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "I will not be needing them anymore. And as for the money, Jamal, you can keep it. Consider it a gift." My father scoffed, a harsh sound of disbelief. "You are giving him the money?" Calvin asked, his tone shifting into smug vindication. He looked at my mother, nodding as if my sudden compliance proved his patriarchal theories correct. "You are finally seeing reason, Maya. You are finally understanding your place in the family structure. It is good that you are letting this go." I turned my head to look at the man who had raised me. "I am not letting it go because I understand my place, Calvin," I said, my voice dropping to a low, steady pitch that froze the smirk on his face. "I am letting it go because I have finally calculated the exchange rate. I spent 5 years bleeding for that money. I skipped meals, I lost sleep, I sacrificed my 20s to build that fund, and you took it in 5 minutes to buy a sports car and lease a glass box to stroke an ego that produces nothing of value. But as I stand here looking at the 4 of you, I realize something incredibly important. I pointed to the keys resting on the walnut desk. Consider that $150,000 my permanent buyout from this toxic bloodline, I stated, letting the words sink into the sterile air-conditioned room. That is the final price of my freedom. You have bought yourselves a son who will bankrupt you and a daughter-in-law who will spend your retirement funds on handbags. But you no longer have me. I am walking out that door, and I am never coming back. Do not call me when his agency inevitably defaults on this lease. Do not call me when the bank comes for the house to cover his debts. You are all entirely on your own. Maya, Elise, you stop this foolishness right now! My mother shrieked, her voice rising in genuine panic as I turned my back on them. You do not walk away from your family. I did not stop. I adjusted the strap of my laptop bag securely over my shoulder. It held my proprietary code, my algorithms, my true value. They had taken my liquid cash, but they could never extract the brilliance from my brain. I pushed through the heavy glass doors of the suite, leaving them standing in the opulent wreckage of their own delusion. I walked down the long corridor, passing the junior executives who were now openly staring. I did not lower my eyes. I kept my chin perfectly parallel to the floor, projecting a cold, untouchable authority that Jamal could never afford to buy. I bypassed the receptionist and stepped into the elevator, pressing the button for the lobby. The stainless steel doors slid shut, cutting off the muffled sound of my father yelling my name down the hallway. The descent felt like shedding a physical weight. With every floor, the elevator dropped, the invisible chains of family expectation, guilt, and enforced subservience snapped and fell away. By the time the doors opened into the ground floor lobby, I felt a strange, hollow clarity. I had exactly $0 in my bank account. I had no way to pay my rent at the end of the month. I had no family to fall back on. But I was completely and entirely free. I pushed through the revolving doors and stepped out onto the Atlanta pavement. The weather had violently shifted while I was upstairs. The oppressive, humid heat of the afternoon had broken, giving way to a massive summer thunderstorm. The sky was the color of bruised iron. A torrential downpour was hammering the city, turning the streets into rushing rivers of gray water. I did not run for cover. I gripped my laptop bag tightly against my side, shielding my computer beneath my jacket, and walked directly into the storm. The rain soaked through my clothes in seconds, flattening my hair against my face and chilling my skin. It felt baptismal. It washed away the sterile, recycled air of Jamal's fake empire and the suffocating scent of my mother's expensive perfume. My cheap compact car was still sitting illegally in the fire lane where I had abandoned it. A soaked parking enforcement ticket was plastered to the windshield, fluttering wildly in the wind. I snatched the ticket from the glass, unlocked the door, and threw myself into the driver's seat. The interior of the car was quiet, insulated from the roaring storm outside. The windows immediately began to fog up from my damp clothes. I sat there shivering, slightly staring at the steering wheel. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation was beginning to recede, leaving behind the terrifying practical reality of my situation. I was 33, broke and utterly alone. I rested my forehead against the damp steering wheel, taking a deep, shaky breath. Suddenly, the sharp, corporate trill of my cell phone shattered the quiet of the car. I flinched, pulling the phone from my jacket pocket. I assumed it was Calvin calling to hurl more threats, or Yvonne calling to manipulate me with tears. But the name glowing brightly on the cracked screen made my breath catch in my throat. It was Marcus Sterling. He was a prominent venture capitalist, specializing in tech infrastructure. I had pitched my proprietary cybersecurity software prototype to his firm 3 months ago. They had been impressed by the code but ultimately passed because I lacked the formal business credentials. They wanted a founder with an MBA, not just a brilliant engineer. My hand trembled as I swiped the screen to accept the call. I cleared my throat, forcing my voice to sound steady and professional, despite the fact that I was currently dripping wet in a fire lane. "This is Maya Wilson," I answered. "Maya Marcus Sterling," said his voice booming through the small speaker, crisp and energetic. "I am so glad I caught you. I know it has been a few months since you came into our offices, but my lead engineers have not stopped talking about that prototype you demonstrated. We ran some of your predictive threat models through our beta testing environment last week." I sat up perfectly straight, the cold rain soaking into the fabric of my car seat, completely forgotten. How did the models perform? I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. They did not just perform, Maya Marcus said, a distinct note of awe in his voice. They completely anticipated and neutralized a simulated zero-day exploit that our current enterprise software missed entirely. Your architecture is flawless. Listen, I know we had concerns about your lack of formal executive training, but the board had a meeting this morning. We decided we do not care about a Stanford degree when you are writing code that can revolutionize the financial security sector. We want the software Maya, and we want the architect who built it. We want to fund you. Full seed capital. $2 million to start. How soon can you come in to discuss the term sheet? 18 months passed since the afternoon I sat soaking wet in my cheap compact car and accepted Marcus Sterling's offer. The relentless torrential downpour that had soaked me to the bone felt like a distant memory, entirely removed from the climate-controlled sterile air of the boardroom I currently occupied. I sat at the center of a massive polished mahogany table on the 50th floor of Omnicorp Global, a Fortune 500 financial logistics firm in downtown Manhattan. The view from the floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping panorama of the city, but I kept my eyes fixed entirely on the screen of my laptop. Marcus sat silently to my left, fulfilling his role as my venture capital backer, but allowing me to command the room completely. Across the table sat 6 men in bespoke suits. They represented the highest executive tier of Omnicorp, including their Chief Executive Officer, Arthur Vance, and their Chief Technology Officer, Gregory Thorne. Thorne was a man who wore his arrogance like a secondary cologne. For the past 20 minutes, he had been leaning back in his plush leather chair, inspecting his manicured fingernails and offering thinly veiled, patronizing remarks about my software. He had spent his entire career building the corporate firewall that protected Omnicorp's billions, and he was fundamentally offended by the presence of a 34-year-old black woman claiming she could breach it. "You have a very impressive theoretical model, Miss Wilson," Thorne said, his lips curling into a condescending smile. "And I am sure your predictive algorithms work wonderfully in a controlled laboratory environment or for small-scale startups. But Omnicorp is a global entity. We spend $40 million annually on network security. We employ a team of 200 dedicated cybersecurity analysts. We utilize military-grade encryption protocols and dynamic threat isolation. Your software is a fascinating academic exercise, but it is entirely redundant here. We are impenetrable." I did not argue with him. I did not raise my voice or attempt to talk over his boasting. I had spent the last 18 months learning that the most powerful response to arrogance is a quiet, indisputable demonstration of competence. I simply closed my presentation file and looked directly at the CEO, Arthur Vance. "I appreciate your confidence in your team, Mr. Thorne," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "But confidence is not a metric I can measure. If you are entirely certain that your network is impenetrable, you will not mind letting me prove my thesis. I do not need a laboratory environment. I only need a standard guest Wi-Fi connection and 3 minutes of your time." Thorne let out a sharp, dismissive laugh, looking at the other executives as if inviting them to join in on the joke. He pulled a laminated card from the center of the table and slid it across the mahogany surface toward me. It contained the credentials for the guest network, a heavily restricted channel isolated from their main servers. "Be my guest," Thorne said, waving his hand expansively. "Take 5 minutes if you need it. We will order coffee while you poke around in the sandbox." I did not take 5 minutes. I connected my laptop to the guest network and launched my proprietary software Aegis. The room filled with the low hum of the air conditioning and the soft clinking of porcelain cups as an assistant poured coffee for the executives. They engaged in light conversation, ignoring me completely. They assumed I was just another overconfident startup founder about to hit a brick wall. I tuned them out, entirely slipping into the deep, focused flow state that had defined my life for the past year and a half. My fingers flew across the keyboard. Thorne was right about one thing. His front door was heavily fortified. Any brute force attack would trigger a lockdown instantly. But I had not built Aegis to break down doors. I had built it to find the cracks in the foundation. Omnicorp had recently acquired a smaller logistics firm in Europe and integrated their legacy servers into the main network. Aegis immediately mapped the digital architecture and flagged a microscopic vulnerability in the communication protocol between the old European servers and the new American database. It was a blind spot, a digital shadow that Thorne's $40 million team had completely overlooked. I deployed a payload through the vulnerability, bypassing the dual-factor authentication and slipping past the internal monitoring systems like a ghost. I watched my screen light up with cascading lines of green text as I gained root access to the central executive server. I did not stop there. I pivoted laterally, accessing the private communication channels of the board members. At exactly 2 minutes and 47 seconds, I hit the final command key. I reached over and plugged the HDMI cable into my laptop. The massive 80-inch monitor at the head of the boardroom flickered and mirrored my display. The casual chatter around the table died instantly. Displayed in high definition for the entire room to see was Gregory Thorne's highly classified personal corporate drive. I had opened a document labeled Project Apex Q4 Projections. It was an unredacted, detailed breakdown of an upcoming hostile takeover that Omnicorp was planning to execute next month. It was the kind of insider information that could tank their stock price and trigger a federal investigation if leaked to the press. Thorne's face drained of all color. He dropped his coffee cup onto its saucer with a loud clatter, spilling hot liquid onto the polished wood. He stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. "As you can see, Mr. Thorne," I said, breaking the heavy, suffocating silence. "Your dynamic threat isolation failed to recognize my intrusion because I did not attack your perimeter. I simply walked through an unsecured integration point left over from your European acquisition. I currently possess full read and write access to your primary servers. I could delete your entire client database. I could broadcast your quarterly acquisition strategy to your competitors. I could shut down your internal communications globally. And your 200 dedicated analysts still do not know I am inside the house." The CEO, Arthur Vance, sat perfectly still, staring at the screen. He did not look at Thorne. He looked at me. The condescension was entirely gone, replaced by a sharp, calculating intensity. "How long did that take you, Vance?" asked his voice, completely devoid of emotion. 2 minutes and 47 seconds, I replied, unplugging the HDMI cable and restoring the room to its previous state. "Your current software operates on a reactive model. It waits for a known threat signature to attack and then attempts to block it. Aegis operates on a predictive model. It actively hunts for structural vulnerabilities and patches them autonomously before an exploit can occur. If I can find this crack in your foundation in under 3 minutes, a dedicated state-sponsored hacking group can certainly do the same." Vance finally turned to his chief technology officer. Thorne was sweating, visibly shifting in his chair and stammering about isolated incidents and anomalous variables. Vance raised a single hand, silencing him immediately. Vance turned back to me, folding his hands together on the table. "What is the cost of a 3-year enterprise license and full global implementation?" Vance asked. $10 million, I stated. I did not blink. I did not hedge. I did not offer a discount. I demanded exactly what I knew my brilliance was worth. "Draft the contract," Vance said, turning to his legal counsel sitting at the far end of the table. "We will sign it today." Walking out of that building with a $10 million contract secured changed the entire trajectory of my existence. It was the first massive domino to fall in a rapid sequence of calculated victories. I returned to Atlanta and poured every ounce of my energy into scaling my company. I hired a team of elite developers who worked remotely. I leased secure server space. I watched my business bank account transition from 7 figures to 8. I was no longer just a freelancer taking whatever jobs came my way. I was the founder and CEO of a highly profitable tech enterprise, and I did it all in absolute silence. I did not post my successes on social media. I did not buy a luxury sports car to parade around the city. I quietly purchased a beautiful high-security condominium in Buckhead, paying in cash. I set up a robust corporate holding company to manage my growing portfolio of investments. I completely vanished from the radar of Calvin, Yvonne, and Jamal. Occasionally, I would see updates through mutual acquaintances. I would see photos of Jamal posing in front of his leased glass office, talking about grinding and building a legacy. I would hear rumors about my parents complaining to their church friends about their ungrateful daughter who abandoned the family because she was jealous of her brother's success. They continued to construct a narrative where I was a bitter failure who had retreated into obscurity. I let them believe exactly what they wanted to believe. I let Jamal spin his web of fake corporate dominance while his margins steadily collapsed. I waited with the infinite patience of someone who holds all the cards. I monitored the commercial real estate market, knowing that a business built on stolen money and entitlement was mathematically destined to fail. When the property management group handling Jamal's office building quietly listed the property for sale due to a liquidity crisis of their own, I did not hesitate. I routed the funds through my holding company, bypassing any public scrutiny. I purchased the brick and steel foundation of my brother's entire fragile ego. I became his landlord. I laid the trap perfectly, waiting for the inevitable moment when his reality would crash into his delusions, and I would be the one holding the hammer. That moment arrived precisely when my parents summoned me to Sunday dinner armed with a guarantor agreement, demanding I save the golden child from eviction. They had no idea they were asking me to save him from myself. While I was quietly executing my $10 million federal contract and fortifying the digital architecture of global financial institutions, Jamal and Chloe were busy constructing a completely different kind of architecture. They were building a monument of absolute, undeniable delusion. Social media was their primary weapon, and their desperate need for validation meant their fabricated reality bled into every corner of my extended social network. Just 3 months after Calvin drained my trust fund, Jamal and Chloe took a highly publicized 2-week excursion to Dubai. The photographs they posted were aggressive, curated to project an image of untouchable corporate royalty. There was Jamal posing on the bow of a rented superyacht in the Persian Gulf, holding a glass of vintage champagne and staring thoughtfully at the horizon. There was Chloe lounging in a private climate-controlled cabana at the Burj Al Arab, draped in designer swimwear that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. The captions attached to these photos were masterclasses in corporate narcissism and toxic hustle culture. Building the vision, generational wealth in motion. When God blesses the grind, the view changes. They were burning through the exact money I had saved for my Stanford tuition, trading my tangible future for a temporary digital aesthetic. The irony of their performance was mathematically hilarious. Because of my connections in the corporate sector and my eventual acquisition of the building Jamal leased, I could see the exact timeline of his financial ruin. While he was paying for private helicopter tours over the Palm Jumeirah, his agency's actual revenue was quietly cratering. He had lost 2 of his anchor clients during that very trip because he was in a different time zone, unavailable, and missed critical campaign launch deadlines. He was bleeding capital. His operating costs were astronomical, his deliverables were late, and his client retention was abysmal. But instead of scaling back, apologizing, and doing the actual work required to run a business, he doubled down on the facade. He believed his own lie. Jamal genuinely thought that if he just looked rich enough, real wealth would magically materialize out of thin air. This toxic charade was heavily subsidized and protected by the environment Calvin had built. My father was a senior deacon at a massive, highly influential megachurch in Atlanta, a congregation of over 4,000 people where social status was equated directly with divine favor. The church was a theater of prosperity gospel, and Calvin was its lead actor. Every Sunday, he would parade Jamal and Chloe through the grand sanctuary vestibule like prized show horses. He would corner other business owners in the congregation, pointing to Jamal's tailored Tom Ford suits and Chloe's fresh diamonds, using them as undeniable walking proof of his own patriarchal wisdom. "That is what a strong black man leading his family looks like," Calvin would loudly proclaim, ensuring his booming voice carried to the surrounding pews. He would use Jamal as a living sermon on male dominance and financial blessing. My mother, Yvonne, played her supporting role perfectly, accepting compliments from the church ladies about her highly successful son, while casually omitting the fact that she had another daughter who was quietly out-earning everyone in the sanctuary. They fed off this public validation like a narcotic. It blinded them to the impending crash. To maintain their elevated status among the megachurch elite and the local corporate scene, Jamal decided to host an extravagant one-year anniversary gala for his marketing agency. It was an absolutely catastrophic financial decision. He was already drowning in high-interest credit card debt and missing essential vendor payments. But in his warped corporate logic, a lavish, over-the-top party would project ultimate success, attract high-end investors, and magically save his sinking ship. He hired a premium event planning firm that demanded a massive deposit. He ordered custom ice sculptures carved with his agency's logo, mandated top-tier open bars, and booked a celebrity DJ. He decided to host this monument to his own vanity right in the main atrium of his leased commercial building, the very building I was in the process of quietly acquiring. The digital invitation arrived in my inbox on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I was sitting in my newly purchased, highly secure Buckhead condominium, drinking black coffee and reviewing the final closing documents for my latest round of software licensing. The commercial deed to the office building was officially mine. I had just finished pulling up the tenant delinquency report, which clearly highlighted that Jamal Wilson Marketing Solutions was exactly 90 days behind on rent when my email chimed. The email was from Chloe. It was an elaborate gold-and-black animated graphic inviting the recipient to a night of excellence, celebrating 1 year of industry disruption with Jamal Wilson Marketing Solutions. The guest list attached to the forward included the megachurch elite local influencers and anyone Jamal thought he could network with. It was meant to be the social event of the season. But Chloe had not just sent me the generic blast. She had accidentally included me on the mailing list and then deliberately added a personalized note at the very bottom of the email, ensuring I would see it. The font shrank to a casual, dismissive size, but the words were razor sharp. "Hi Maya," the note began. "Hope you are doing well in your little apartment. Jamal and I are hosting our massive agency anniversary gala next weekend. We hired an incredible production team, but Jamal mentioned the AV guys are looking for someone to run the background IT booth and manage the projector cables during his keynote speech. We know things have been really tight for you financially since you had to drop your school plans. We wanted to keep it in the family and offer you the gig. It pays $200 for the night. Let me know if you want to make some extra cash so I can put you on the vendor list. Dress code for vendors is all black. Best, Chloe." I sat back in my plush ergonomic chair and read the email a second time. I read it while looking directly at the massive monitor on my desk, which displayed the legal transfer of ownership for the building where this party was being held. I read her offer for $200 while looking at the official ledger showing her husband owed me $45,000 in back rent. The sheer breathtaking audacity of the message was almost poetic. Chloe was inviting me to work as a background technician at a party funded by my stolen money, hosted inside a building I literally owned. She wanted me to stand in the shadows wearing a black vendor uniform managing cables so I could watch my family celebrate the man who had robbed me. She thought she was delivering a crushing reminder of my place at the bottom of the family hierarchy. She thought she was throwing me a scrap of charity while simultaneously twisting the knife about my dropped school plans. She wanted to humiliate me in front of the very people Calvin bragged to every Sunday. I did not feel a single ounce of anger. I felt a cold, absolute sense of strategic clarity. Chloe had just handed me the perfect stage. She wanted a keynote speech. She wanted a display of power. She wanted the entire congregation, the local influencers, and their elite social circle to witness the undisputed dominance of Jamal Wilson. I leaned forward and rested my hands on my keyboard. I did not reply to the email. I did not need to accept her pathetic $200 offer to attend my own property. I decided right then and there that I would give Jamal, Chloe, Calvin, and Yvonne exactly what they wanted. I would give them an unforgettable night. I would let them dress up in their finest clothes, drink their expensive champagne, and gather all their friends into the center of my atrium. And then, at the absolute height of their fabricated glory, I would bring the entire house of cards crashing down. The Buckhead commercial district was gridlocked with luxury vehicles when my black town car pulled up to the curb. I stepped out onto the damp pavement, smoothing the fabric of my custom-tailored emerald green silk gown. It was a masterpiece of structural design featuring a plunging neckline and a dramatic thigh-high slit. I paired it with minimalist diamond drops and a pair of Christian Louboutin stilettos that cost more than the rent on my first apartment. I did not look like a background IT technician looking for a $200 handout. I looked like the woman who owned the building, which conveniently was exactly what I was. I walked through the revolving glass doors of my property and stepped into the main atrium. Jamal had spared absolutely no expense in spending money he did not have. The lobby had been transformed into a nightclub disguised as a corporate gala. Neon uplighting washed the imported Italian marble floors in shades of purple and gold. Two massive custom ice sculptures bearing the Jamal Wilson Marketing Solutions logo flanked a premium open bar where bartenders frantically mixed craft cocktails for the Atlanta elite. A string quartet played classical renditions of modern rap anthems in the corner. It was a spectacular monument to financial illiteracy. I accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing waiter and scanned the room. It did not take long to spot my family. They were positioned directly in the center of the atrium, holding court beneath a massive floral chandelier. Calvin was wearing a bespoke tuxedo, gesturing broadly as he spoke to a group of older men from the megachurch congregation. Yvonne stood beside him, draped in heavy velvet, nodding at whatever patriarchal wisdom my father was dispensing. Jamal was sweating slightly in a burgundy velvet dinner jacket, laughing entirely too loudly at a joke made by a tall, silver-haired man holding a scotch glass. And then there was Chloe. She was wearing a blindingly loud, gold-sequined gown that looked desperate under the harsh event lighting. She was the first to spot me. I watched her eyes scan the crowd and lock onto my emerald dress. Her smile instantly vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic that quickly morphed into vicious anger. She shoved her champagne flute into Jamal's hand and marched across the marble floor, her heels clicking aggressively against the stone. "Maya, what on earth are you doing?" she hissed, grabbing my arm and trying to pull me toward the service corridor. I yanked my arm out of her grip with a sharp, calculated motion. "I am attending a gala, Chloe," I replied, taking a slow sip of my water. "I received an invitation." "I told you to wear black and report to the loading dock," she snapped, her voice rising as several nearby guests turned their heads. "You are supposed to be managing the projector cables. You cannot be out here on the floor mingling with the guests. These are high net worth individuals, Maya. These are major investors. We cannot have a college dropout wandering around the open bar pretending she belongs in this tax bracket. You are going to embarrass Jamal in front of Jonathan Hayes." I glanced over Chloe's shoulder. The silver-haired man holding the scotch was Jonathan Hayes. He was a notorious Atlanta venture capitalist known for aggressively funding tech-integrated marketing firms. He was exactly the kind of whale Jamal needed to save his sinking agency. "I am not here to embarrass anyone, Chloe," I said, stepping smoothly around her frozen figure. "I'm just here to network. I am." Before she could physically block me again, I walked directly into the center of the group, interrupting Calvin mid-sentence. The entire circle fell silent. My father stared at me, his jaw clenching so tightly I could see a vein pulsing in his temple. Jamal looked as if all the oxygen had been vacuumed out of his lungs. Maya, Calvin said, his voice dangerously low, carrying a warning meant to terrify me into submission. "You are in the wrong place." "Not at all," I said, turning my back to my father and extending my hand directly to the silver-haired investor. "Jonathan Hayes, it is a pleasure to finally meet you in person. I am Maya Wilson. I run Aegis Global Data Security. We recently secured the Omnicorp Global Enterprise contract." Jonathan Hayes raised a silver eyebrow, his eyes lighting up with sudden, intense interest. He ignored Jamal entirely and shook my hand firmly. "The Omnicorp contract," he repeated, his voice booming with genuine respect. "That was the most aggressive digital infrastructure overhaul this city has seen in a decade." I read the industry briefs. You dismantled their legacy firewalls in under 3 minutes during a live pitch. That is a legendary story in my circles. I did not realize you were part of the Wilson family. Jamal frantically stepped forward, desperately trying to reclaim the spotlight. She is my little sister, Jonathan, Jamal said, forcing a loud, nervous laugh. She plays around with computers. Just a tech hobbyist, really. We keep her busy with back-end support while the agency handles the real heavy lifting. In fact, she was supposed to be running the IT booth tonight. Jonathan frowned, looking from Jamal's sweating face to my calm, composed posture. A tech hobbyist who holds a $10 million federal logistics contract. He asked, his tone dripping with sudden skepticism. That is a fascinating way to describe an industry leader, Jamal. I smiled, offering a look of polite professional concern. Jamal has a very traditional view of business, I said smoothly. He focuses primarily on optics and aesthetic disruption. But as you know, Jonathan, the real value in modern marketing is not in the visual presentation. It is in the secure logistical pipeline of consumer data analytics. Exactly, Jonathan said, stepping closer to me, completely turning his back on my brother. The analytics are everything. I was just asking Jamal about his data retention architecture and his encryption protocols for high-volume client metrics. Jamal swallowed hard, adjusting his velvet collar. Right, well, as I was saying, Jonathan, our synergy is entirely focused on scaling engagement. We utilize a highly disruptive cloud-based metric system that maximizes return on investment through targeted consumer interface. He was stringing meaningless corporate buzzwords together in a desperate attempt to sound intelligent. It was the verbal equivalent of a house made of cards. A cloud-based metric system. I repeated, turning to look at my brother with clinical precision. That is a fascinating approach, Jamal, considering your agency currently relies on a third-party unencrypted server host that routes localized data through unprotected regional nodes. Your client metrics are essentially sitting in a digital fishbowl. Jamal's face flushed a deep mottled red. You do not know what you are talking about, Maya, he snapped, dropping the professional facade entirely. We use top-tier encryption. We have the best scaling software on the market. You are utilizing a legacy AES 128-bit encryption key that was deprecated 5 years ago. I stated, my voice cutting through the ambient noise of the gala like a scalpel. You do not employ dynamic threat isolation. Your cross-platform integration lacks even basic multi-factor authentication protocols for administrator access. If a mid-level hacker decided to target your agency right now, they could exfiltrate your entire client database, hijack your payment portals, and lock you out of your own network before you even finished your first glass of champagne tonight. The silence that followed was absolute. Calvin stood frozen, completely out of his depth, unable to rescue his son from a technical slaughter he did not comprehend. Chloe looked back and forth between us, clutching her designer purse as if it could shield her from the humiliation. Jamal opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He was entirely exposed. The glittering ice sculptures, the velvet jacket, the imported marble, it all dissolved, leaving only a terrified, incompetent man standing in the center of a room he could not afford. Jonathan Hayes stared at Jamal for a long, agonizing moment. The look of friendly corporate interest was entirely gone. It was replaced by the cold, calculating glare of an apex predator realizing the prey was diseased. Jonathan did not say a word to my brother. He simply turned to me and gestured toward the quiet corridor leading away from the main atrium. Maya, Jonathan said, his voice suddenly hushed and deadly serious. Could I have a private word with you for a moment? Certainly, Jonathan, I replied. I walked away from my family, leaving them standing in the wreckage of their fabricated reality. I did not look back. I followed the venture capitalist into the quiet, carpeted hallway, far away from the pulsating neon lights and the hired string quartet. Jonathan stopped and turned to face me. He pulled a pristine white linen handkerchief from his pocket and slowly wiped the condensation from his Scotch glass. He looked at me with a mixture of profound relief and grim realization. I have been reviewing the quarterly prospectuses Jamal sent me for the past 3 weeks, Jonathan said, keeping his voice low to ensure absolute privacy. He is asking for a $3 million capital injection to expand his operations. The projected growth percentages he submitted are staggering. They look like the blueprint for the next major marketing conglomerate in the Southeast. I remained perfectly still, waiting for him to reach the conclusion I already knew was coming. But after listening to him speak tonight, and after hearing your structural analysis, Jonathan continued, his eyes narrowing sharply. I am looking at a man who does not understand the fundamental mechanics of his own industry. A man running that kind of outdated, vulnerable infrastructure cannot possibly be generating the margins he is claiming on paper. He took a slow sip of his drink, his gaze boring into mine. Your brother's numbers are not adding up, Maya, Jonathan stated with absolute certainty. I think he is fabricating his revenue streams to secure my capital. I need a forensic data audit of his entire digital footprint before I authorize a single dime, and I do not trust his internal team to provide accurate access logs. I want to hire your firm to do it. The following Monday morning at exactly 8 o'clock, I walked through the revolving glass doors of the Buckhead Commercial Building. I did not stop at the security desk. I did not need a visitor badge. As the legal owner of the property, my biometric data was already coded into the primary access system. I swiped my hand over the optical scanner and stepped into the private executive elevator. I was not wearing an emerald silk gown today. I wore a charcoal gray tailored suit carrying a sleek titanium briefcase that held a single encrypted solid-state drive. I was no longer the discarded sister or the ungrateful daughter. I was the lead forensic auditor, acting on the direct legal mandate of Jonathan Hayes and his venture capital consortium. The elevator doors chimed and parted, revealing the top-floor lobby of Jamal Wilson Marketing Solutions. The neon moss wall looked even more ridiculous in the harsh morning light. The receptionist, a young man with a headset, looked up in surprise as I bypassed his desk entirely. I did not ask for permission. I walked straight down the imported Italian marble hallway toward the glass-enclosed server room that housed the agency's entire digital infrastructure. Jamal emerged from the corporate kitchenette holding a branded ceramic coffee mug. He froze. His casual Monday morning smile instantly warped into a scowl of deep irritation. He set the mug down on a passing intern's desk and marched toward me, closing the distance with heavy, aggressive steps. Maya, what are you doing here? Jamal demanded, his voice echoing off the glass walls. I told Chloe to rescind that IT offer after the stunt you pulled at the gala on Saturday. You embarrassed the family in front of Jonathan Hayes. We are entirely done with your tantrums. Security is going to escort you out. I did not break my stride. I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out a thick folded legal document, printed on heavy watermarked paper, and pressed it flat against Jamal's chest. He instinctively brought his hands up to grab it, stopping his forward momentum. I am not here for an IT job, Jamal, I said, my voice projecting a cold, absolute authority. That is a binding legal mandate authorized by Jonathan Hayes and the primary stakeholder consortium of your agency. You asked them for a $3 million capital injection based on your quarterly revenue projections. They have formally retained Aegis Global Data Security to conduct a comprehensive forensic audit of your digital footprint before a single dollar is transferred. I am the lead auditor. Jamal stared down at the document. His eyes darted across the legal text, the official signatures, and the corporate seal. The blood drained from his face, leaving his skin a pale, sickly gray. He looked back up at me, his arrogant posturing completely evaporating into raw, naked panic. You cannot do this, Jamal stammered, taking a step backward. This is a conflict of interest. You are my sister. You cannot audit my company. There is no legal conflict of interest when an independent contractor is retained by the investor board, I replied, stepping closer and forcing him to retreat another step. Jonathan specifically requested my firm because he watched you lie to his face about your encryption protocols. Now step aside, Jamal. I need physical access to your mainframe. I moved toward the biometric keypad securing the server room doors. Jamal panicked. He lunged forward physically, inserting himself between me and the glass doors. He spread his arms wide, pressing his palms against the glass, blocking the keypad with his body. He was sweating, his breathing shallow and rapid. You are not touching those servers, Maya, he hissed, his voice cracking. You are just trying to sabotage my funding because you are jealous. I will call Jonathan myself. I will tell him you are executing a personal vendetta. You are not getting in there. Before I could explain the federal penalties for obstructing a stakeholder-mandated financial audit, the heavy wooden doors of the corner office swung open. Calvin strode down the hallway, his face flushed with patriarchal fury. He had clearly been in Jamal's office strategizing damage control from the weekend. He wore a sharp gray suit, his posture rigid with the familiar commanding presence he used to silence opposition in his megachurch congregation. Maya Elise Wilson. Calvin boomed, his voice carrying the full weight of his manufactured authority. What in the name of God do you think you are doing? I turned to face my father, keeping my posture perfectly relaxed. I am executing a forensic data audit, Calvin. Your son is attempting to physically obstruct a legal mandate. Calvin marched up to us, stopping inches from my face. He pointed a thick, calloused finger directly at my chest. You will drop this audit immediately, he commanded. You will call Jonathan Hayes and tell him the company is financially sound. You are crossing a line, Maya. You are deliberately attacking your own blood. This is a family business. We handle our affairs internally. You need to respect family boundaries and walk out of this office right now. I stared at the finger pointing at my chest. I looked up into my father's eyes, seeing the exact same cold, calculating manipulation he had used the day he drained my tuition fund. He expected me to fold. He expected 33 years of conditioned obedience to kick in. He expected the fear of his disapproval to force me into submission. Family boundaries. I repeated, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet pitch. That is a fascinating concept, Calvin. Where were your family boundaries when you bypassed my individual ownership and wired my life savings into his failing bank account? Where were your family boundaries when you stood in this exact office and told me my ambitions were a cute hobby while you funded his delusions? You do not get to weaponize the concept of family only when it protects your investments. Calvin's jaw tightened. He lowered his hand, his eyes narrowing into dark slits. You are destroying your brother's legacy out of pure spite, Maya. If you plug into those servers, you are dead to me. You are dead to this family. I smiled. It was not a happy expression. It was the cold, sterile smile of a woman who had finally calculated the absolute zero value of the threat being leveled against her. I have been dead to this family since the day I stopped being a convenient source of capital, I stated. And Jamal does not have a legacy, Calvin. He has a mountain of unsecured debt and a massive impending fraud investigation. Now both of you move. Calvin did not budge. Jamal pressed himself harder against the glass, his eyes wide with terror. They genuinely believed that physical intimidation could stop a digital execution. They forgot that I did not just bring a legal mandate, I brought the keys to the castle. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my smartphone. I opened the proprietary building management application that I had acquired during the commercial real estate transfer. I bypassed the tenant controls, accessing the master security override for the entire top floor. I tapped the screen once. A sharp electronic buzz echoed through the hallway. The magnetic lock on the server room door instantly disengaged. The heavy glass door clicked open, breaking Jamal's balance and forcing him to stumble forward. How did you do that? Jamal gasped, catching himself against the doorframe. I am the only one with administrator access to that keypad. You lease the office space, Jamal, I said, sliding past him into the freezing, heavily air-conditioned climate of the server room. But I own the building, and as the property owner, I reserve the right to override internal security measures during a verified legal compliance check. I did not wait for their shock to register. I walked directly to the primary server rack, humming loudly in the center of the room. I set my titanium briefcase on the crash cart and snapped the locks open. I pulled out my decryption drive, a heavy black solid-state device loaded with Aegis extraction algorithms. Calvin and Jamal stood in the doorway, paralyzed by a reality they could no longer manipulate. They could not yell at the server. They could not guilt-trip the algorithms. They were entirely powerless. I located the primary data port on the master node. I did not hesitate. I plugged the decryption drive directly into the mainframe. The LED indicators on the drive flashed from red to a solid, blinding green. The extraction protocol initiated instantly. A secondary monitor mounted on the server rack flared to life, displaying a cascading waterfall of raw, unencrypted data. It was pulling everything. Internal emails, hidden offshore banking routing numbers, deleted accounting ledgers, and the undeniable digital proof of a massive systemic financial fabrication. I stood in the cold blue light of the server room, watching the absolute destruction of my father's golden child render itself in high definition. I did not need to say another word. The data was speaking for me. The numbers cascaded down the secondary monitor in ruthless chronological order. My decryption algorithms tore through Jamal's rudimentary firewalls like tissue paper, stripping away every layer of his fabricated corporate identity. I brought up the primary accounting dashboard and split the high-definition screen down the middle. On the left side, I projected the pristine color-coded financial spreadsheets Jamal had presented to Jonathan Hayes and the investor board. On the right side, I displayed the raw, unfiltered bank feeds extracted directly from his offshore merchant accounts. I highlighted the gross operational revenue column. In Jamal's pristine investor pitch, the agency boasted a net profit margin of 22% with consistent month-over-month growth. In reality, the actual operational revenue was a flat, terrifying zero. Not a single legitimate client had paid for marketing services in over 8 months. The few legitimate accounts he had secured during his first quarter had all churned rapidly, demanding refunds for unfulfilled contracts and missed campaign deliverables. Calvin stepped closer to the screen, his eyes narrowing as he tried to comprehend the violently conflicting data sets. "What exactly am I looking at, Maya?" he demanded, his voice stripped of its usual booming authority. "You are looking at a mirage, Calvin," I replied, my fingers flying across the keyboard to isolate the incoming wire transfers. I pulled up the transaction logs for the past 3 quarters. Jamal is not running a marketing agency. He is running a textbook Ponzi scheme. Jamal let out a strangled gasp, clutching the edge of the server rack as if the floor had suddenly dropped out from underneath him. I clicked on a massive incoming wire transfer for $500,000, tagged as an initial investment from a local real estate developer. I ran a quick trace, isolating every outflow associated with that specific deposit. I showed my father how that $500,000 did not go toward hiring creative staff, buying digital ad space, or securing vital vendor contracts. Instead, the money immediately splintered into dozens of outgoing personal channels. I opened the primary expense ledger. $30,000 wired directly to a luxury automotive dealership to cover the lease on the midnight black Porsche currently sitting in the VIP parking spot downstairs. $75,000 funneled to an American Express black card registered in Chloe's name. I pulled up the itemized statements for that specific credit card, displaying them in bright green text for the entire room to see. Dubai yacht rentals, first-class Emirates flights, 5-figure shopping sprees at luxury boutiques in Buckhead. Every single diamond Chloe had worn to the megachurch, every expensive bottle of vintage champagne Jamal had popped at his anniversary gala, every tailored velvet suit he wore to project dominance was paid for by defrauding new investors to cover the losses of the old ones. He was using fresh capital injections to maintain a fictional lifestyle while his actual business produced absolutely nothing of value. "It is called bridging the gap," Jamal stammered, his voice pitching high with raw panic. He pushed himself off the server rack, waving his hands frantically. "You have to project massive success to attract massive success. The new investor capital was just a temporary bridge loan until we landed the national beverage account. I was going to pay it all back with a corporate retainer. It is standard industry practice." "It is wire fraud, Jamal," I stated, keeping my eyes locked on the screen. "And it carries a mandatory federal prison sentence." Calvin stood perfectly rigid. The magnitude of his son's criminal exposure was finally penetrating his thick patriarchal armor. He looked at Jamal not with the pride of a father looking at his heir, but with the dawning horror of a man realizing he had backed a catastrophic liability. But I was not finished. The algorithms were still digging, and my eyes caught a recurring structured outflow hidden deliberately beneath layers of shell company transfers. Every single month, on the exact first day of the month, a wire transfer of exactly $12,500 was routed from the investor capital pool to a private wealth management account at a regional Georgia bank. It was heavily obfuscated, buried under generic consulting fees and retainer invoices designed to look like legitimate business expenses. I ran a rapid trace on the routing number. The software took exactly 4 seconds to bypass the banking firewall and pull the registered beneficiary of that specific account. I maximized the window, letting the beneficiary information fill the entire 80-inch monitor. The payment was attached to the primary mortgage of a 6-bedroom suburban estate. The names listed on the deed were Calvin Wilson and Yvonne Wilson. The server room went completely dead silent. The only sound was the low mechanical hum of the cooling fans pushing freezing air around our bodies. I turned away from the keyboard and looked at my father. He was staring at his own name glowing on the screen, his face perfectly ashen. The mighty patriarch, the man who had stood in this very office and lectured me about a man's sacred duty to provide the man who had paraded his son in front of thousands of congregants as the ultimate symbol of divine financial blessing, was secretly having his luxury lifestyle subsidized by his son's corporate fraud. "You stole my tuition money to fund his fake empire," I said, the sheer mathematical poetry of the betrayal washing over me. "And he was using his fake empire to pay your mortgage." Calvin opened his mouth, but his voice failed him. His hands trembled slightly at his sides. The unshakable moral high ground he had occupied for my entire life shattered into a million irreparable pieces right in front of my eyes. "You sold your own daughter out for $12,500 a month." I continued, stepping away from the server rack and closing the distance between us. "You looked me in the eye and told me my ambitions were a cute hobby. You told me Jamal was a provider. You told me family requires sacrifice. But the only person sacrificing anything was me. You were entirely complicit in this scheme. You allowed him to drain my life savings because you needed him to look successful enough to keep paying for the roof over your head." "Maya, you have to understand," Calvin finally rasped, his posture crumbling. "The church required a certain image. We had unexpected expenses. Jamal promised me the agency was generating unprecedented capital. I did not know where the money was coming from. I swear to you, I did not know." "Ignorance is not a recognized legal defense in a federal fraud investigation," Calvin the First replied, my voice completely devoid of sympathy. "And it certainly does not absolve you of robbing your own child." I walked back to the crash cart and initiated the final sequence. I copied the entire decrypted server drive onto my encrypted titanium hard drive. I extracted every fake invoice, every fraudulent bank transfer, every piece of evidence proving that Jamal Wilson Marketing Solutions was nothing more than a criminal enterprise wrapped in velvet and silk. Jamal fell to his knees on the cold tile floor, sobbing openly. He reached out, grabbing the hem of my suit jacket. "Maya, please," Jamal begged, tears streaming down his face. "You cannot give that drive to Jonathan Hayes. He will destroy me. He will send me to prison. I will lose Chloe. I will lose everything. You are my sister. You have to protect me." I looked down at the man who had stolen my future to buy a Porsche. I reached down and calmly peeled his fingers off my jacket. "You told me to stop acting like a victim, Jamal," I said, echoing the exact words he had thrown in my face 18 months ago. "You told me you were building a legacy. Now you get to live in it." I pulled my decryption drive from the server, snapped it securely into my titanium briefcase, and walked out of the room. The drive back to my Buckhead condominium was accompanied by the quiet hum of the city traffic and the heavy, satisfying weight of the titanium briefcase sitting on the passenger seat. I had left Jamal weeping on the server room floor and Calvin standing in the wreckage of his own manufactured authority. The adrenaline that had carried me through the digital breach was slowly replacing itself with a cold, methodical focus. I walked into my home office, locked the reinforced door behind me, and immediately plugged the decryption drive into my primary secure workstation. Compiling the forensic audit report was not just a professional obligation, it was an autopsy. I spent the next 4 hours formatting the raw data into an undeniable, crystal clear narrative of financial ruin. The spreadsheets painted a picture of staggering criminality: wire fraud, bank fraud, tax evasion, interstate embezzlement. Jamal had not simply lied about his profit margins. He had meticulously engineered a digital vacuum that sucked legitimate investor capital into a black hole of luxury car leases, offshore accounts, and my parents' suburban mortgage. I was just finishing the executive summary for Jonathan Hayes and preparing the mandated regulatory filings when my encrypted mobile device vibrated across the glass desk. The caller identification displayed my mother's name, Yvonne Wilson. I sat back in my ergonomic chair and watched the screen glow. I knew exactly why she was calling, and I knew exactly why it was her, and not Calvin. My father was a man who ruled through booming volume and physical intimidation. When those tactics catastrophically failed, as they had in the server room, he retreated. He sent his wife to do the emotional heavy lifting. Yvonne was the family's designated guilt distributor. She was the one who smoothed over the cracks in the facade, wrapping demands for submission in the guise of maternal concern. I reached over, tapped the screen to answer, and simultaneously engaged the secure audio recording software integrated into my workstation network. It was standard operating procedure for a forensic auditor dealing with a compromised entity. It was also the smartest decision I would ever make. "Maya," my mother whimpered the moment the line connected. The sound was perfectly pitched. It was a fragile, breathy sob designed to trigger an immediate protective response. "Please tell me you are at home. Please tell me you have not sent that information to anyone yet." "I am at my desk, Yvonne," I replied, keeping my voice entirely devoid of inflection. "I am finalizing the data extraction now." She let out a long, shaky breath. "Maya, you have to stop. You have to listen to me. Your father just came home and he is in pieces. He is absolutely devastated. Jamal is hyperventilating in the guest room. Do you have any idea what you are doing to this family? You are tearing us apart. How could you do this to your own brother?" I stared at the monitor displaying the exact routing numbers where Jamal had siphoned the money Calvin stole from my tuition fund. "I did not do anything to Jamal," I stated flatly. "Jamal committed federal wire fraud. I simply turned on the lights." "You are being heartless!" my mother cried, her voice rising in pitch. "You are acting like a machine. We are your family, Maya. We share the same blood. If you hand that data over to Jonathan Hayes, you will destroy everything we have built. Jamal will be ruined. He could go to prison. Do you want your brother to be locked in a cage? Do you want his children to grow up without a father?" She paused, letting the weight of her manufactured guilt hang in the empty air. When I did not immediately offer reassurance, she pivoted to her primary concern: the optics. "And think about your father, Maya," she pleaded, her voice trembling with genuine panic. "Think about his position at the church. He is a senior deacon. He sits on the pastoral advisory board. We have thousands of congregants who look up to us, who look to your father for moral and financial guidance. If this scandal gets out, it will be on the front page of the local news. We will be humiliated. We will be stripped of our titles. We will have to show our faces in the sanctuary, knowing everyone is whispering about us. You cannot do this to our reputation." I listened to her sob and realized with crystalline clarity that there was not a single ounce of concern for the people Jamal had actually defrauded. There was no remorse for the venture capitalists, the small business owners, or the tech startups whose money had paid for Chloe's Dubai vacations. There was certainly no apology for the fact that my life savings had been sacrificed to keep this charade afloat. Yvonne only cared about the velvet pews, the social hierarchy, and the terrifying prospect of the megachurch finding out that the Wilson family was a hollow fraud. "I am not responsible for your public relations crisis," I said simply. "I am responsible for delivering an accurate forensic audit to the stakeholders who hired me." Yvonne's crying abruptly stopped. The fragile whimpering vanished, completely replaced by a sharp conspiratorial whisper. It was the sound of a woman getting down to business. "What if we make you whole?" she asked. I narrowed my eyes, staring at the audio waveform dancing across my screen. "Excuse me." "Your money, Maya. The money your father reallocated to help Jamal get the agency off the ground." Yvonne said the word reallocated, as if Calvin had simply moved a couch from one room to another instead of draining $150,000 of my tangible future. "We know you have been angry about that. We know it caused a rift. But your father and I want to make it right. We want to apologize. We can give you the money back, all of it. $150,000 wired directly into your primary checking account by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning." I sat perfectly still. My mind processed the financial data I had just extracted from their servers. Jamal's accounts were completely frozen by my security block. His personal assets were leveraged to the absolute limit. Calvin and Yvonne's house was heavily mortgaged, and they possessed zero liquid capital outside of the fraudulent transfers Jamal had been sending them. They did not have $150 to spare, let alone $150,000. "Where exactly are you getting that kind of liquid cash, Yvonne?" I asked, my tone dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Your bank accounts are empty. Jamal's revenue stream is a mirage. You do not have it." There was a long, agonizing hesitation on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of my father pacing heavily in the background of her house. "Your father has signatory authority over the church's community outreach and building expansion fund," Yvonne finally admitted, her voice dropping so low I could barely hear her. "The congregation just finished a massive fundraising drive for the new youth center. There is over $2 million sitting in that account. We are just going to borrow a small portion of it, Maya. Just the $150,000 we owe you. No one will even notice it is missing for months." The sheer, breathtaking audacity of the proposition hit me like a physical blow. They were offering to embezzle charitable donations from their own church congregation to pay off their daughter in order to cover up the fact that their son was running a corporate Ponzi scheme. It was a fractal of financial corruption. It was fraud nested inside of fraud. "You are offering to steal from your own church," I stated, ensuring the audio recording captured every single syllable of the accusation with crystal clarity. "We are not stealing," Yvonne snapped, her defensiveness flaring. "We are bridging a temporary gap. Jamal is going to pay it back. He just needs this $3 million venture capital injection from Jonathan Hayes to get the agency over the hump. Once that money hits his account, he will quietly replenish the church fund and everything will be fine, but he cannot get that funding if you show Jonathan those servers." The ultimate manipulation was finally laid bare. "So what exactly is the condition for this stolen money?" I asked, leaning forward and resting my forearms on the glass desk. "You just need to fix the report, Maya," my mother said, her voice regaining its soothing maternal cadence. "You are the lead auditor. You control the narrative. You just write up a summary saying the agency is financially sound. Tell Jonathan Hayes there was a minor software glitch in the legacy servers or a routing error. Give Jamal a clean bill of health. Take your $150,000 and let this family heal. It is a win for everyone. We can put all this ugliness behind us." I looked at the finalized forensic audit document open on my right monitor. It was a damning, irrefutable catalog of theft. I moved my mouse, aligning the cursor directly over the transmission icon linked to Jonathan Hayes in the Federal Regulatory Portal. I looked at the audio recording software on my left monitor, watching the green waveform capture my mother's desperate illegal bribe. I felt a profound, undeniable sense of absolute liberation. The final chains of filial obligation dissolved into dust. "I don't need $150,000 anymore, Mom," I reply, my finger hovering over my keyboard. I just hit send on the unedited audit report to the SEC, and by the way, this call was recorded. 2 days after the federal audit landed on the desks of the Securities and Exchange Commission, the bureaucratic machinery of the government was quietly grinding into motion. My family, completely unaware that the digital guillotine had already dropped, was operating on pure, unadulterated panic. They knew I had the data. They knew Jamal's agency was exposed. But in their warped, narcissistic reality, they believed they could still outrun the truth if they just found enough cash to plug the gaping holes in their sinking ship before Jonathan Hayes demanded a final accounting. Their solution was a masterclass in moral bankruptcy. They organized a massive impromptu fundraising gala at the Cathedral of the New Covenant. The cathedral was not just a church. It was a 15,000-seat arena of prosperity gospel, equipped with broadcast-quality television cameras, concert lighting, and a congregation that treated its senior leadership like untouchable royalty. Calvin was a senior deacon and a member of the pastoral advisory board. He knew exactly how to manipulate the machinery of the sanctuary to extract capital from the faithful. The Friday night event was billed as a community empowerment initiative. The digital flyers promised a night of celebrating local entrepreneurship and funding the next generation of minority business leaders. It was a beautiful lie designed to mask a desperate scramble for liquid cash. I walked through the towering oak doors of the fellowship hall, wearing a tailored navy blue blazer and carrying a thick leather-bound dossier. I did not come to pray, and I certainly did not come to donate. I came to watch the final act of their theatrical delusion. The banquet hall was packed with over 500 of Atlanta's most influential congregants, local politicians, wealthy business owners, and devout followers milled around tables draped in white silk. At the front of the room stood an elevated stage featuring a lucite podium and two massive projection screens. Jamal was working the floor, sweating profusely through his designer suit, his eyes darting nervously toward the doors every few seconds. Yvonne was holding court near the buffet, smiling tightly, while her hands visibly shook. They were terrified. They were trying to raise enough money to replace the stolen church funds and cover Jamal's fraudulent tracks before anyone looked too closely at the ledgers. The heavy bass of the gospel choir faded as Pastor Jenkins, a tall, imposing man with a booming baritone voice, took the stage to offer the opening prayer. He spoke passionately about community wealth and supporting the visions of young leaders. Pastor Jenkins was an institution in the city, but he was also a man who trusted his advisory board implicitly. He had given Calvin the keys to the kingdom, and Calvin was currently driving it off a cliff. When the prayer ended, Calvin confidently stepped up to the lucite podium, taking the microphone. He looked out over the sea of faces, projecting the absolute unshakable authority of a righteous patriarch. Tonight is about legacy. Calvin began, his voice echoing through the massive speakers, perfectly modulated to elicit emotional resonance. We are here to support a visionary project. My son, Jamal Wilson, has built an agency that is revolutionizing how we connect with the global market. But true growth requires community backing. It requires a village. We are launching the Wilson Empowerment Initiative tonight to ensure his enterprise has the capital to bring hundreds of jobs to this very congregation. A chorus of supportive murmurs and applause rippled through the banquet hall. Calvin smiled, feeding off the validation. Then his eyes locked onto me, standing quietly at the back of the room near the mahogany double doors. His smile sharpened into a predatory grin. He had spotted his target. He thought he had the ultimate leverage. He believed that the peer pressure of 500 devout congregants would force me into submission. And looking at the back of the room, I see, we are blessed to have my daughter Maya with us tonight. Calvin announced, his voice rising to a crescendo. The camera operators instantly pivoted. A blinding white spotlight hit me, pinning me against the dark wood of the doors. 500 faces turned in their chairs to stare directly at me. Maya is the CEO of Aegis Global Data Security. Calvin continued, his tone oozing with manufactured paternal pride. God has blessed her with a multi-million-dollar technology firm. She has broken barriers in the corporate world. And as we all know, to whom much is given, much is required. Maya, your brother is building a bridge for our people. He needs seed capital for this initiative tonight. What better way to show your gratitude for your blessings than to stand before your church family and pledge your corporate profits to ensure your brother's vision comes to life? Let us show this city what a united family looks like. The congregation erupted into thunderous applause. People were clapping, standing up, and looking at me with expectant, joyful faces. It was a psychological ambush executed with terrifying precision. Calvin had publicly backed me into a corner. If I refused, I was the greedy, ungrateful daughter turning her back on her brother and her community. If I agreed, I would be openly funding a federal crime. He stood at the podium looking down at me with a smug, victorious glint in his eye. He thought he had checkmated me in front of God and everyone. Before the applause could even die down, Chloe stepped out from the wings and joined Calvin on the stage. She was wearing a modest, high-necked white dress deliberately chosen to project innocence and purity. She grabbed a secondary microphone and stood beside the podium, placing a supportive hand on Calvin's shoulder. "I just want to say something," Chloe spoke into the microphone, her voice trembling with perfectly calibrated emotion. She dabbed at the corner of her eye with a tissue, ensuring the cameras caught the glint of a tear. "When I married into this family, I saw the struggles that Black entrepreneurs face in this city," Chloe said, her voice echoing through the cavernous hall. "I saw how hard Jamal works. I saw the systemic barriers. As an outsider welcomed into this beautiful community, I have learned that generational wealth only happens when we stand together. I just want to see this family healed. I want to see us united. Maya, we love you. We are asking you to put aside the past and be the leader we know you are. Please invest in your brother. Invest in us." It was a staggering display of weaponized white saviorism. Chloe was standing on a pulpit using the genuine historical struggles of a marginalized community to guilt-trip me into funding her next luxury vacation to Dubai. She was playing the virtuous peacemaker, crying performative tears to manipulate 500 innocent people into emptying their wallets for a Ponzi scheme. The congregation murmured in sympathetic agreement. A few older women in the front row nodded, wiping their own eyes. Jamal stood near the edge of the stage, looking down at his shoes, looking like a man waiting for the executioner's blade. I did not shrink away from the blinding spotlight. I did not look embarrassed or ashamed. I adjusted my grip on the thick leather-bound dossier in my right hand and began walking slowly down the center aisle of the banquet hall. The room fell into a hushed, expectant silence. The only sound was the rhythmic clicking of my heels against the polished hardwood floor. The crowd parted respectfully, assuming I was walking forward to deliver a tearful reconciliation and a massive, oversized check. Calvin's smug smile widened as I approached the stage. He thought he had won. He thought the sheer weight of the audience had broken my resolve. I climbed the 5 carpeted steps to the elevated platform. I did not look at Chloe, who was offering a tremulous, welcoming smile. I did not look at my father, who was already reaching out to pull me into a performative embrace. I walked directly past them and stopped in front of Pastor Jenkins, who was seated in a high-backed leather chair just behind the lucite podium. The pastor looked up at me, offering a warm, pastoral smile. "Maya, it is a blessing to see you," he said softly. I did not return the smile. I held out the heavy leather-bound dossier and placed it directly into his hands. "Pastor Jenkins, I suggest you open that immediately," I said, my voice perfectly steady and entirely devoid of emotion. He frowned, looking down at the thick stack of papers. He opened the leather cover. The first page was a certified bank wire trace. The second page was the unedited forensic audit summary I had filed with the federal government. The third page was a printed transcript of my mother's phone call. I turned my back on the pastor and walked over to my father. Calvin's victorious smile had completely vanished, replaced by a look of dawning horror. I reached out and calmly pulled the microphone from his rigid fingers. He was too paralyzed by the sudden shift in my demeanor to resist. I turned to face the 500 congregants. The spotlight was still blinding, but I looked straight into the camera lens, broadcasting my face onto the massive projection screens above the stage. "I will not be donating a single dollar to Jamal's initiative tonight," I said, my voice booming through the state-of-the-art sound system, freezing the entire room in absolute shock. Because Jamal Wilson Marketing Solutions is not a functioning agency, it is a fraudulent enterprise. Over the past 8 months, my brother has generated 0 actual corporate revenue. He has been operating a sophisticated Ponzi scheme, utilizing fresh investor capital to fund luxury car leases, international vacations, and his wife's credit card debt. A collective gasp swept through the banquet hall. The silence that followed was suffocating. I could hear Chloe let out a panicked whimpering sound behind me. But that is not why I brought this documentation tonight. I continued, refusing to let the tension break. I brought this documentation because this fraud has bled directly into this sanctuary. The initiative you are being asked to fund tonight is not seed capital for community jobs. It is a desperate attempt to cover up a felony. I turned slightly, pointing a finger directly at my father, who was now gripping the lucite podium to keep himself from collapsing. For the past year, exactly $12,500 of stolen investor funds has been wired every single month to pay the mortgage on Calvin and Yvonne Wilson's personal estate. I stated the raw truth, ringing off the stained glass windows. And when I uncovered this fraud 48 hours ago, my mother called me in a panic. She offered me a bribe of $150,000 to alter the forensic audit and hide my brother's crimes from the federal authorities. The murmurs in the crowd began to escalate into a loud, chaotic rumble of disbelief and anger. When I asked my mother where she was getting $150,000 in liquid cash to pay a bribe, she confessed that Calvin was planning to temporarily reallocate the money from the church's youth center expansion fund. I announced, projecting my voice over the rising noise of the congregation. They intended to steal your charitable donations to pay for my silence. Pastor Jenkins stood up so fast, his heavy leather chair crashed backward onto the stage. He was staring at the transcript of Yvonne's recorded phone call, his hands visibly shaking with righteous fury. He looked at Calvin, his eyes wide with betrayal. I turned back to face the camera, staring directly into the lens. I will not be donating to Jamal's fraud, I said, dropping the microphone onto the lucite podium with a loud echoing thud. But I will donate this. Full transparency. The thud of the microphone hitting the lucite podium echoed like a gunshot through the massive sanctuary. For 3 agonizing seconds, no one breathed. 500 of Atlanta's most influential citizens sat entirely paralyzed in their silk-draped banquet chairs. The silence was not peaceful. It was the volatile, highly pressurized silence of a bomb waiting to detonate. Pastor Jenkins was the first to move. He stood up from his leather chair, his hands gripping the edges of the forensic dossier I had just handed him. His eyes scanned the certified bank wire traces and the printed transcript of my mother's desperate bribe. I watched the color drain from the pastor's face. He turned slowly toward my father. Calvin was completely frozen, his bespoke tuxedo suddenly looking like a borrowed costume. I did not wait for my father to formulate a defense. I stepped smoothly toward Chloe, who was standing at the edge of the stage, her mouth hanging open in silent terror. Before she could react, I reached out and slid the secondary microphone from her trembling fingers. I brought it to my lips, letting my voice wash over the spellbound congregation. The Wilson family legacy is a manufactured lie, I announced, ensuring every syllable was perfectly articulated. You have been sold a beautifully orchestrated narrative of divine blessing and generational wealth. My father has stood on this very stage for years, parading my brother as the ultimate symbol of corporate success and righteous prosperity. But there is no marketing empire. There is no scaling tech agency. There is only a trail of defrauded investors' hollow promises and a mountain of unsecured debt. A low, dangerous rumble began to build in the banquet hall. People were turning to one another, their faces twisting from shock into raw anger. These were people who had just written checks, who had just pledged their hard-earned money to Jamal's fake community initiative. Do not let them deceive you any longer. I continued, pacing slowly across the elevated platform. Jamal has been operating a textbook Ponzi scheme. He has not secured a single legitimate client contract in over 8 months. Every luxury car you have seen him drive, every designer gown his wife wears to Sunday service, every lavish vacation they broadcast on social media was funded directly by stealing from new investors to pay off the old ones. He is bankrupt, morally and financially. And when his house of cards finally began to collapse this week, my parents decided that your charitable donations were the perfect slush fund to bail him out. Lies! Calvin roared, his voice cracking violently as he finally snapped out of his paralysis. He lunged toward the center of the stage, pointing a shaking finger at me. She is a jealous, bitter woman. She has always hated her brother. She is trying to destroy this family out of pure spite. Do not listen to a word she says." Pastor Jenkins stepped forward, physically blocking Calvin from advancing any further. The pastor held up the thick dossier, his expression dark with righteous fury. "This is a certified federal audit report," Calvin Pastor Jenkins boomed, his voice carrying without the need for a microphone. "It contains the exact routing numbers for our youth center expansion fund. It contains the transcript of your wife offering to embezzle $150,000 of church money. You brought a criminal enterprise into my sanctuary." Calvin stumbled backward, as if he had been physically struck. He looked out at the congregation, searching for a friendly face, searching for the deferential respect he had commanded just 10 minutes earlier. He found nothing but disgust. Several prominent business owners in the front row were already standing up, pulling out their phones to cancel the checks they had just written. Jamal suddenly rushed forward, his face slick with sweat. "You cannot prove anything, Maya!" He shouted, his voice pitching into a hysterical shriek. "You are just a hired auditor. You do not have the authority to tear down my company. I have lawyers. I have investors who believe in me. You are bluffing. You are trying to scare them." I turned to face my brother, my expression entirely clinical. I felt a profound sense of closure as I delivered the final fatal blow to his delusion. "I am not bluffing, Jamal," I replied smoothly. "And I am not just a hired auditor, I am a federally licensed forensic data specialist. When I uncovered the magnitude of your wire fraud 48 hours ago, I did not just print a report for Jonathan Hayes. I submitted the entire unedited server extraction directly to the Securities and Exchange Commission through their secure enforcement portal." Jamal stopped dead in his tracks. His eyes went wide and his jaw practically unhinged. "The SEC does not take Ponzi schemes lightly," I continued, ensuring the entire room heard the finality in my voice. "They fast-tracked the review. As of 2 hours ago, your agency is officially under federal investigation. Your corporate accounts are zeroed out. Your personal assets are locked. Your offshore merchant routing numbers have been flagged and disabled. Every single credit card in your wallet will decline. You do not have an agency anymore, Jamal. You have a crime scene." The congregation erupted. The restrained murmurs exploded into absolute chaos. People were shouting, demanding answers, rushing toward the stage. In the center of the madness, Chloe finally snapped. The composed, tearful white savior completely vanished, replaced by a vicious, cornered animal. She grabbed the edge of the lucite podium and screamed at the top of her lungs, her face contorted with rage. "You are a liar!" Chloe shrieked, her voice echoing horribly through the cavernous hall. "You are a crazy, pathetic liar. You have always been jealous of us, Maya. You dropped out of your fancy college, and you have been miserable ever since. You are just trying to ruin Jamal because you could never build anything yourself. You are insane." She spun around to face the crowd, waving her hands frantically. "Do not listen to her." Chloe begged, her voice raw and desperate. "She is having a mental breakdown. She is just an angry, lonely woman trying to tear down a successful black man. We are the victims here. She is trying to steal everything we worked for." The congregation did not buy a single second of her performance. A woman in the second row, one of the prominent church elders Chloe had tried to manipulate earlier, stood up and pointed directly at her. "Save your tears, little girl," the elder shouted over the din. "You tried to steal from our children to pay for your diamonds. You are both going to jail." Chloe recoiled, her face flushing crimson as the reality of her social destruction set in. There was no more high society. There were no more Dubai vacations or VIP sections. There was only the harsh, glaring light of public accountability. Calvin had slumped against the back wall of the stage, his hands covering his face. Yvonne was nowhere to be seen, having presumably fled the banquet hall the moment Pastor Jenkins opened the dossier. Jamal was pacing in tight, frantic circles, muttering to himself, pulling out his phone and frantically refreshing his banking applications, only to find red error messages staring back at him. I stood in the center of the stage, perfectly calm amidst the storm I had unleashed. I had done exactly what I promised myself I would do. I had removed the toxic parasitic infection from my life, and I had done it with absolute, undeniable truth. Then, right on cue, a sound cut through the shouting and the chaos. It was a loud, heavy metallic clack that reverberated from the back of the sanctuary. The massive solid oak double doors of the fellowship hall swung violently open, hitting the interior walls with a resounding crash. The congregation immediately fell silent, parting like the Red Sea as they turned to look at the entrance. Two federal agents stepped across the threshold. They wore dark, nondescript suits, their expressions carved from stone. Gold shields gleamed distinctly on their belts under the harsh event lighting. They did not pause to take in the lavish decorations or the terrified silence of the room. They walked with terrifying, synchronized purpose directly down the center aisle of the banquet hall, their eyes locked onto the stage. The lead agent, a tall, broad-shouldered man with closely cropped hair, unbuttoned his suit jacket and pulled a thick folded document from his inside pocket. He did not look at Calvin. He did not look at Chloe. He walked straight up to the edge of the elevated platform and looked directly at my brother. Jamal Wilson, the agent announced, his voice carrying absolute, inescapable authority. "We have a federal warrant for your arrest on multiple counts of wire fraud, bank fraud, and interstate embezzlement. You need to come with us right now." The lead agent moved with a practiced mechanical efficiency that completely ignored the holy setting of the sanctuary. He gripped Jamal by the biceps, spinning him around and slamming him face first against the clear lucite podium. The sharp, unforgiving click of steel handcuffs ratcheting shut echoed through the microphone, amplifying the sound of my brother's total ruination across the massive auditorium. Jamal's knees instantly buckled. He let out a pathetic, high-pitched wail, his designer shoes sliding against the polished hardwood of the stage, as the two federal agents hauled his dead weight back upright. He tried to twist his head to look at the congregation, his eyes wide and completely vacant of the arrogant swagger he had carried for his entire life. The banquet hall exploded into absolute bedlam. 500 members of the Cathedral of the New Covenant surged out of their seats. The collective roar of the crowd was deafening, a volatile mixture of shock, outrage, and morbid fascination. Within seconds, hundreds of glowing smartphone screens shot up into the air. The congregation was no longer a flock of faithful supporters. They were an audience capturing the spectacular implosion of the Wilson family on high-definition video, live streaming the arrest of the church's golden child to the entire city of Atlanta. Chloe backed away from the podium as if Jamal had suddenly caught fire. The delicate, tearful white savior routine she had perfectly executed just minutes earlier vanished into thin air. Survival instinct overrode her theatrical loyalty. When Jamal desperately tried to lunge toward her, his cuffed hands reaching out for his wife, Chloe physically recoiled. She shoved her hands out in front of her, her face twisting into a mask of pure, self-preserving revulsion. "Do not touch me!" Chloe screamed, her voice cracking as she scrambled backward toward the edge of the stage. She turned wildly to the federal agents, her eyes darting between their gold shields and the flashing cameras of the congregation. "I had absolutely nothing to do with this. I swear to God I knew nothing about his shady business. He lied to me. He handled all the finances. I thought we were a legitimate agency. He used me. He kept me completely in the dark." Jamal stared at his wife, his jaw trembling. The ultimate betrayal registered in his eyes. The woman he had stolen millions to impress, the woman whose lavish lifestyle he had financed with my tuition money and fraudulent investor capital, was publicly throwing him to the wolves to save her own skin. "You cannot do this, Chloe!" Jamal sobbed, his voice breaking as the agents began to drag him forcefully down the carpeted steps of the stage. "Tell them I was going to fix it. Tell them about the bridge loan." Chloe did not even look at him. She spun around, buried her face in her hands, and began executing a flawless, hyperventilating panic attack for the benefit of the watching cameras, loudly sobbing about how she had been deceived by a financial predator. I stood perfectly still, watching the federal agents march my brother down the center aisle. The congregants parted like the Red Sea, shouting insults, demanding their donation checks back, and holding their phones inches from Jamal's tear-streaked face. I turned my attention to my father. Calvin Wilson, the unshakable patriarch, the senior deacon, the man who demanded absolute submission from everyone in his orbit, had collapsed into one of the velvet-lined chairs on the stage. His broad shoulders were completely slumped. His tailored tuxedo looked suddenly several sizes too big. He stared blankly at the floor, his chest heaving. His pristine social standing, the reputation he valued above the safety and future of his own daughter, had been completely eradicated in a matter of minutes. He was ruined. The entire church leadership was watching him with undisguised contempt. Pastor Jenkins was already speaking rapidly to the church's legal counsel, actively orchestrating Calvin's immediate excommunication to shield the ministry from the federal fallout. Suddenly, fingers dug violently into my right forearm. I turned to see Yvonne. My mother had materialized from the chaos, her face smeared with mascara and sweat. Her eyes were wild, darting frantically around the room, as if looking for an emergency exit that did not exist. Her carefully maintained image of the elegant, composed pastor's wife had shattered into sharp, jagged pieces. "Maya," she hissed, her fingernails biting painfully through the fabric of my blazer. "You have to fix this right now. You have to call your bank." I looked down at her hand, my expression entirely hollow. "Excuse me, your company has money," Maya Yvonne demanded, her voice a frantic, breathless whisper over the roar of the crowd. "Aegis Global makes millions. You have corporate accounts. You have to pay for Jamal's bail. They are taking him to a federal holding facility. You have to hire him a defense attorney. We do not have the liquid cash because of the asset freeze. You have to write a check tonight." I stared at the woman who gave birth to me. Minutes ago, she had begged me to accept stolen church funds to cover up a felony. Now, standing in the wreckage of her son's arrest, her immediate instinct was to demand that I empty my own company's coffers to save him from the consequences of his actions. There was no apology for stealing my future. There was no remorse for the lies. There was only the relentless parasitic entitlement that had defined my entire existence in this family. I calmly raised my left hand and pried her fingers off my arm, bending her wrist back just far enough to make her gasp and step away. I smoothed the wrinkled fabric of my blazer, looking down into her panicked, desperate eyes. "Stop acting like a victim, Yvonne," I said, my voice echoing with icy, deliberate precision. I mirrored the exact cadence, the exact inflection she had used against me 2 years ago when I stood in her kitchen begging for my stolen tuition money. "You should be proud of supporting the family." My mother's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The absolute finality of my words struck her like a physical blow. The color drained completely from her face. She stood frozen on the stage, a broken monument to her own hypocrisy. I did not wait for a response. I turned my back on my parents, walked down the side steps of the platform, and exited through the heavy oak doors of the sanctuary, leaving them to burn in the fire they had built. 3 months later, the suffocating humidity of the Atlanta summer had given way to the crisp, sharp winds of autumn. I stood on the expansive glass-paneled balcony of my new penthouse, looking out over the glittering expanse of the city skyline. The noise of the traffic below was a distant ambient hum, entirely blocked out by the soundproof architectural glass. The air up here was clean, it was elevated, it was completely untouched by the toxicity of the ground floor. The liquidation of Jamal Wilson Marketing Solutions had been a brutal, highly publicized bloodbath. The Securities and Exchange Commission had moved with ruthless efficiency. They tore through Jamal's fabricated ledgers, seizing every single asset connected to his fraudulent enterprise. The midnight black Porsche had been towed from his VIP parking spot and auctioned off to compensate a fraction of his victims. The velvet-lined corporate office had been stripped down to the bare drywall, the silk curtains and server racks seized as evidence. Jamal was currently sitting in a federal detention center awaiting trial. The district attorney had formally rejected his desperate attempts at a plea bargain. Without the stolen church funds to offer as restitution, and with my forensic audit mapping every single illicit wire transfer, he had absolutely no leverage. He was facing a mandatory minimum of 15 years in federal prison. Chloe had executed her exit strategy with terrifying precision. The very next morning following the gala, she filed for divorce. While Jamal was trapped in holding undergoing federal processing, Chloe had utilized her intimate knowledge of his passwords to quietly liquidate the last of his hidden offshore crypto wallets. She transferred the untraceable funds to a secure account in her maiden name, packed her designer luggage, and completely vanished from the state of Georgia. She abandoned Jamal to face the federal indictments entirely alone, securing her own luxury survival while leaving him to drown. Ooh. The collateral damage had systematically decimated my parents' lives. Pastor Jenkins did not hesitate. The morning after the gala, Calvin and Yvonne were formally and publicly ousted from the Cathedral of the New Covenant. Pastor Jenkins delivered a blistering Sunday sermon denouncing their financial corruption, officially severing all ties between the church and the Wilson family. Calvin was stripped of his deaconship. He was removed from the advisory board. The congregation, the social hierarchy that Yvonne valued more than oxygen, turned their backs on them overnight. They became absolute pariahs in their own community. Without the $12,500 monthly wire transfers from Jamal's Ponzi scheme, Calvin and Yvonne's financial reality crashed down around them. They had no savings. They had no legitimate income. Within 60 days, the bank initiated aggressive foreclosure proceedings on their 6-bedroom suburban estate. The final eviction notice was taped to their mahogany front door just last week. They were currently packing their lives into cardboard boxes, preparing to move into a cramped, low-income apartment complex on the outskirts of the city. My life, conversely, had never been more secure. The flawless execution of the Wilson audit had catapulted Aegis Global Data Security into a new stratosphere of corporate legitimacy. Jonathan Hayes, deeply impressed by my refusal to bow to familial corruption, had aggressively recommended my firm to his vast network of venture capitalists. We were currently handling the cybersecurity infrastructure for 3 of the largest tech conglomerates in the Southeast. My profit margins were real. My legacy was clean. I had built an empire entirely on my own terms. I took a slow, deliberate sip of a vintage Cabernet Sauvignon, enjoying the rich, heavy finish of the wine. My encrypted mobile device resting on the glass patio table suddenly vibrated. The screen lit up in the twilight darkness. The caller identification displayed my father's name, Calvin Wilson. I did not silence the phone. I did not block the number. I simply stood on my balcony and watched the screen glow. The phone rang until it automatically diverted to voicemail. The automated transcription software on my device instantly engaged, translating the incoming audio message into bright white text, scrolling across the black screen. "Maya, please pick up." The text read, capturing the broken, gravelly desperation in Calvin's voice. "Your mother is not doing well. The bank locked us out of the house this morning. We are sleeping in a motel. Jamal's public defender says he needs character references for the sentencing hearing. Please, Maya. You are the only one left. We have nothing. I am begging you. We need you. Please call me back." I read the entire message. I absorbed every single word of his complete and utter defeat. The patriarch who had demanded my submission, who had stolen my future to fund a lie, was reduced to begging the daughter he had discarded. I picked up the phone. I did not feel a trace of anger. I did not feel an ounce of pity. I felt absolute, unshakable peace. I took another sip of my wine, pressed my thumb against the glowing red trash can icon on the screen, and hit delete. The story highlights the absolute necessity of maintaining professional integrity and strict personal boundaries, especially when confronting deeply entrenched, toxic family dynamics. True security does not emerge from appeasing those who systematically exploit you, nor does it come from compromising your moral compass to protect a fabricated legacy. Instead, it stems from establishing financial independence, relying on undeniable facts, and holding perpetrators strictly accountable for their actions, regardless of shared bloodlines. Ultimately, preserving your self-respect requires stepping away from individuals who view your future merely as collateral damage for their own selfish survival. Please share your thoughts in the comments below on how you establish firm boundaries against toxic family dynamics and protect your personal integrity.